Ever since I died, I hadn't felt much of anything. I didn't know what the afterlife would be like, but I didn't expect to be aware of a complete absence. It was peaceful and unbearable at the same time. Then warmth returned, soft, safe, enclosing, and the nothingness snapped away. A heartbeat later, the comfort turned into pressure, crushing from all sides like I'd been shoved into a narrow tube. I was pushed out, the warmth vanished, and sound hit me. Crying. A baby's cry. "It's a boy," a cheerful voice called from behind me. "A boy," someone above me echoed as heavy fabric wrapped around me, and I was lifted toward the voice. After so long without sight, sound, smell, or touch, it took effort to piece together the scene. A small room, several figures, and a woman on the bed, looking down at me with a face my unpracticed eyes couldn't quite focus on, like a painting seen too close. I relaxed as she rocked me in her arms. "What did I get so small?" "You will make a proper devil," she murmured with a pleased smile. "My little riser phoenix." My crying stopped. I stared back, blank and blinking. If nothing else, this was going to be interesting. 3 years old. Being a baby was misery. It's one thing to be bodiless. It's another to have an adult mind trapped in a body too weak to hold up its own head. Maybe it was a year, maybe longer. Either way, it left me with a lingering terror of paralysis. I never wanted to feel that helpless again. I shook off the memory, stepped out of my room, and wobbled down the hall. My fine motor controls still needed work, but I could move, which meant it was time to explore. After making sure no one was watching, I barreled toward the family library on toddler legs. If there were clues on how to use magic, they'd be there. I'd been reborn as a devil in a world where imagination fueled power. Why wouldn't I try it? At the door, I braced myself, scrambled up, hooked 2 fingers over the handle, and hauled down. The door swung, my brace vanished, and I face-planted. Worth it. Grinning, I pushed the door, closed with my shoulder, and tottered to the shelves, scanning spines for anything on magic. I'd asked Mother, Father, Ruvel, and Raquel how to start, but they just laughed and told me to wait until I was older. I didn't want to wait. I was a grown mind stuck with stuffed animals and picture books. I was going stir-crazy. A title caught my eye, On Shaping Mana. I climbed to the 3rd shelf, tugged it free, and let it thud to the floor. I plopped down and flipped it open. My smile faded. Nothing new. Devil magic runs on imagination. The stronger your imagination, the stronger your spells. Could it really be that simple? I looked at my hands. I was a phoenix. Our 3 traits: hellfire, wind, and immortality. From what I remembered, hellfire should be the easiest. I frowned, concentrating, and reached for something. It felt like a brimming cup in my chest, liquid almost spilling over. I tipped it. Orange flame writhed over my hands. Yes. I threw my arms up, blazing fingers and all. Magic. I'd actually done it. There was more to learn, especially magic beyond my bloodline, but first I needed to see exactly what my fire could do. I lowered my hands and studied the flames licking my skin. If Phoenix Fire obeys will, then it should do exactly what I tell it to. I pressed my palms together and funneled the flames into a single orb. Grinning, I swelled it until it was bigger than my head, then crushed it down to a point no wider than my pinky. The tiny star let out a high, angry whine. I tilted my head, then it detonated less than a foot from my face. The blast flung me into a bookshelf. I slid down and groaned. Heat crawled across my skin as fresh fire licked my face and chest, knitting flesh back together. Immortality, confirmed. Only wind left to test. The library doors slammed open. A woman wreathed in flames stormed in, golden hair crackling. Her eyes swept the wreckage with murder in them until they found me. Her fire went out like a snuff candle. Riser. She gathered her dress and rushed over. Devil Regan for the win. By the time she reached me, the pain was gone. I popped to my feet and gave my most innocent wave. Hi, Mother. Nothing to see here. Definitely didn't blow myself up. If anything broke, it was an invisible plate. She scooped me up, turning me in her arms, inspecting every inch. What happened? Are you hurt? Why are you here? You should be in the nursery. I need to. I took pity on her. Hands up, big smile. I made fire. Then I blew up. Right, not that last part. Her eyes widened, slid to the book on the floor, then back to me. I beamed, ready for proper training begins now. You're grounded, she said, voice firm, eyes narrowed. I sagged as she carried me toward the nursery. That was not the outcome I was aiming for. I didn't even get to try wind. 5 years old. Dinner was awkward. Not my fault. Mostly. I had discovered a new way out of the nursery, snuck into the training room, shredded dummies with wind, then forged a sword of fire, and kept going. How was I supposed to know the dummy joints are oiled? Why do magical dummies need lubrication anyway? We ate at the long rectangular table. Servants and armored retainers posted around the room. No one talked much. Riser, father said wearily from the head of the table. How did you get out this time? I scratched the back of my head and stared at a wall statue. The door was open. He sighed, rubbing his brow. That's the 5th explosion this month. Why keep experimenting? I told you I'd teach you when you're older. But it's so cool. I blurted, sounding far younger than I felt. Why can't I learn now? Ruvel chuckled and looked at father. He's not stopping. Let someone supervise him instead of tracking him by the craters. I shot my brother a grateful grin. It would reduce the collateral, Raykal added dryly, carving his steak. Support, but only because he was tired of charred furniture. He was being watched. Mother snapped, turning to a woman behind us. Clarissa, explained. Mother's black-haired bishop curtsied, eyes down. I failed you, my lady. He was in the room when the explosion shook the house. Clarissa was the kind one, the secret tutor, the cookie smuggler. I couldn't let her take the hit. Not her fault, I muttered. I left a fire clone so she'd think I was still there. A fire clone? Father asked, skeptical. I raised my left hand. Flame billowed out, gathered, and took shape, bipedal, slender, with bright blonde hair and piercing blue eyes. A perfect, burning copy of me stood by my chair, flickering and grinning.
Hey everyone, Firescale Audiobooks here. If there's a novel you'd love to hear more of, you can support us on Patreon or Ko-fi. Depending on your tier, I'll make extra parts just for the stories you're most excited about. Usually I can only upload 4 to 5 parts of each novel, but with your support, we can go beyond that. And of course, don't forget to hit subscribe. It helps more than you know.
All conversation and clinking of silverware stopped as the entire room turned to look at my duplicate. How long have you been able to do this? Mother asked, staring suspiciously at the copy as the gears turned in her head. She was starting to figure out how I kept getting away from her. Dunno, I said meekly, dropping my head and crossing my arms. While Ruvel's chair squeaked across the ground as he pushed it back, standing and walking over to my duplicate. A bright orange spell circle appeared before his hand as he leveled it at my duplicate. Can you move it, or is it stationary? Ruvel asked, sounding intrigued. In answer, the duplicate waved at Ruvel. He can't talk yet. I said. I tried to give him vocal cords, but he blew up. That had been a rather interesting experience. The explosion sounded like a scream. That meant I was on the right track, but I needed to work out the kinks. What else can it do? Ruvel said, an inquisitive fire alight in his eyes as he studied the results of my magic. Smiling at my older brother's sincerity, I climbed out of my chair and scurried over to the duplicate. He looks just like me and can move around like I can. And then there's this. My duplicate held its hand out and a flaming sword grew into being. He can use his own fire to make stuff, I said, basking in Ruvel's odd expression. It was very hard to get my brother to do anything other than smile politely, so the fact he was inquisitive spoke to how cool my clone was. Not that I needed someone else to tell me my clone was cool. I already knew that. The duplicate's fire sword was sucked back into its body as it held up its other hand. A small fireball shot out of its palm, but snuffed out before it got 10 feet away. He can shoot out his fire, but he can't replace it. I have to be nearby to refill it, or it'll use itself up. I explained, pointing out the subtle imperfection on the duplicate's face now, that it was missing the fire needed to be a perfect replica of me. Oh, I can also do this, I said excitedly as Ruvel watched on. The duplicate's form was surrounded by flames. At the same time, I covered myself in fire and tugged at my duplicate with my magic. I felt my body shift into flame. When the fire around me faded, I was in a different position. I can switch places with my duplicate. I can't go through solid objects, though. The fire I turn into needs a path to get where it's going. I can turn myself into fire without a duplicate active, but I can't see or hear anything when I'm in that state. So I need some of my own fire at my intended destination so I don't get lost and wind up reappearing around anything nasty. I can sense where any large gathering of my own fire is, so I navigate that way. I can use wind to speed myself up, while I'm made of fire too. I explained, loving the way Ruvel's jaw opened and closed like a fish. How did you figure this out? Ruvel asked breathlessly. I shrugged. We're phoenixes. 2 of our signature powers are related to fire, and one of those uses fire to heal our wounds. It isn't that much of a leap to think we can exist as pure flame. Just don't try to bypass any barriers when you're only fire. I ended up with my arms where my legs should be and had to cut everything off with wind blades so they would heal correctly. That wasn't a pleasant experience. 6. You what? 4. I cringed at the shriek that sounded like a screeching ring wraith. Slowly turning around, I realized that everyone else was still in the room. Mother was on her feet and staring at me with a panicked gleam in her eye. Standing as she was, her pregnant belly was visible, but my focus was on slowly backing away from the murderous aura wafting off her. 1. It was a figure of speech. I tried, taking several more steps backward as actual heat waves radiated off of her body. Mother's breathing sounded like an enraged bull's as she said, "You are grounded until you die." 8. Ryrova, can I have a word? Father said as he stood and gently guided Mother from the room, the fire spilling off of her parting as it fell around him. The door to the hall closed behind them, leaving silence in its wake. 2. I'll remember you fondly, little brother, Rakel said sarcastically. Ruvel continued to inspect my flaming creation while I panicked internally. Mother looked pissed. I doubted she'd let me out of her sight for the next 10 years, which would really screw with my plans. I needed to get stronger and to learn all I could and experiment with my power. This world was an anime in my last life. While I didn't watch the entire show, the 3rd time there was a breast-based power-up, I lost all interest. The mere fact that it was a magical anime meant bad things. 14. By bad things, I was of course referring to the fact that almost every single one of them possessed an unstoppable enemy that showed up sometime around the 3rd season and casually wiped a city off the face of the planet. On the plus side, I was born into a family whose powers were so absurdly broken that we should be at the top of the food chain, but neither my parents nor my siblings were creative enough to do anything with their power other than burn things hot. Credit where it was due, though. Ruvel was exceedingly good at burning things hot. He was in the top 10 fighters in the raiding game scene. Big, organized slugfests where devils could compare dick sizes without anyone getting permanently maimed most of the time anyway. You could hurt yourself if you aren't ready. But we regenerate. I don't need to. Stop, my father said, holding up his hand. I swallowed nervously as I cut off, anxiously awaiting his next words. Riser, your regeneration is no excuse to hurt yourself, nor should it be used as a crutch. Just because you heal rapidly does not mean that you shouldn't avoid being hurt in the first place. What would you do if you accidentally hurt yourself in a way your regeneration couldn't fix? What would you do if you were alone when it happened? We wouldn't be able to find you until it was too late. A phoenix should not die alone, killed by their own incompetence. 1. I hung my head in shame as his words washed over me. It wasn't that I was unaware of the possibility, but I felt like I wasn't doing anything. From what I've been able to gather during my various exhibitions into the library, most if not all mythologies and their associated monstrosities existed in this world. I was wasting away as a small child when, for all I knew, Nidhogg, Kronos, or maybe even Ancalagon could break through into the underworld tomorrow. Who was to say that Ancalagon was fiction when God? Ow. When a cloud sitter wasn't. Maybe that was a paranoid way of looking at things, but I had already died once. I had no interest in ever dying again. I needed to be able to run away from world-ending creatures like that, at the very least. Mother walked up behind Father and looked down at me. Riser, talk to us. Why is it so important to you that you experiment? Are you not content with your toys and books? Shuffling uncomfortably, I said, experimenting's fun. Toys and books are easy. I don't like easy. I want to be strong as the Satans. 2. Father's expression became clouded as he narrowed his eyes at me. You want to be a Satan? That wasn't exactly what I'd said, but it was more or less accurate. I nodded my head shyly, still having a hard time looking my parents in the eyes. Mother and father looked at each other and seemed to have a private conversation with their eyes. What felt like an eternity later, they finally turned back to me. Riser, look at me, father said. I looked up at him anxiously, unsure whether or not he was mad at me. I originally told you we would begin your more serious studies when you were 8, but your mother and I don't think you'll be content to wait until then, so I'll make a deal with you. I swallowed nervously, hanging on his words. If you do no more experimenting by yourself, we will start next year. But, he said before I could get a word in, you cannot endanger yourself anymore. No more experimenting. No more sneaking off. In order for us to be able to trust that you're mature enough to start early, we need to know that you'll do as we say. If you can refrain from endangering yourself for a full year, we'll start teaching you. If you can't, we won't start until you are 12. Do you understand? 4. I nodded my head quickly, overjoyed at the chance to get started. Still, I had to go a year without training. In the grand scheme of things, this was much better. I just had to convince mother and father to let me read some actual books, and I'd be able to tough it out. I would be fine. XXX. 10 years old. The room I found myself in was dark, lit only by a chandelier with plain candles and a few braziers around the room, alight with green fire the color of a shining emerald. The walls were lined with shelves. Some held decaying books bound in anything from leather to human skin. Others held small vials glowing different colors or crystals of varying sizes and shapes. This was Clarissa's laboratory and study. Mother and father made sure she had her own space due to the fact that her mystical pursuits set some of the staff on edge. Clarissa wasn't what people classically thought of when they heard the word mage. Smiling, I flexed my fingers, delighting in the dark violet, unnatural energy that swam between my arms. Well done, my lord. Clarissa praised me, studying the magic in my hands. Ever since I had begun training, she had been my teacher of all things mystical. My parents had devoted the majority of their time to raising my little sister, leaving Ruvel to help me with the Phoenix bloodline, but he had never really expanded his reach into other forms of magic as I desired to. Thus, Clarissa was the best choice. Even before my mother reincarnated her as a devil, she had been immensely skilled in magic, albeit a form of magic most considered strange or an outright waste of time. Clarissa spent hours on end crafting components she used to fuel her spellcasting. By using these trinkets, she was able to create effects that were magnitudes more powerful than they should be for a very low drain on her mana supply. That wasn't to say she couldn't throw a lightning bolt if the situation required it, but why would she waste mana on such a costly spell when she could just as easily debilitate her enemies with a spell that warped the target's perception of space by flipping a coin? Clarissa closed the book on the podium before her and walked around it, approaching me with her hands clasped in front of her. I must admit to curiosity, my lord. While you are improving faster than I had anticipated, I must ask why you pursue this path at all. The power of hellfire and wind eclipses that of anything I could teach you. Clenching my hands into fists, I dispelled the magic I had been maintaining. It is not about pure power, Clarissa. If I only focused on making the biggest explosion possible, then I would inevitably meet someone who could make larger explosions than me, and I would wind up dead. Just look at Lord Lucifer. I will never be able to stand up to his power. Ergo, in order to combat beings stronger than I am, I need versatility. It is a lot harder to dodge a wall of hellfire when curses are hampering your movement. 3. Clarissa's eyebrows narrowed in thought as she absorbed my words. That is a perspective sorely lacking among devilkind, my lord. Where is your pride in yourself? In your family? Surely a scion of the great Phoenix Pillar would be able to defeat any foe. Her last words were said tauntingly, as if she was trying to get a rise out of me. I looked up at her. I abhorred being short and raised an eyebrow. Pride is stupid. I won't get myself killed because someone called me a chicken. People can think whatever they want about me. In the end, all that matters is what I can accomplish and what those close to me think. Everyone else can rot in cositis. 5. Clarissa smiled at me, seemingly content with my answer. A healthy perspective. Arrogance has been many a devil's downfall. Though be sure that the opposite is not your own. Whether you like it or not, the opinions of others mean more than can be measured in the supernatural world. Her wisdom dispensed, she reached into her robe and produced a small, leather-bound book. Read this before our next meeting. I expect you know that you are not to. 4. Use any of the spells, hexes, rituals, or otherwise nasty magical powers found within until I have supervision. Yes, I know. Clarissa was rather strict about that rule. Any head start I would make by practicing on my own would be drastically offset by the month, or so I would have to go without training if I was caught. It wasn't worth it to even try. 2. Good, Clarissa said, an amused smile on her face. She looked over her shoulder at a clock on the wall and tooted disapprovingly. You are late for your swordsmanship lessons. I do hope that. Whatever else she had been saying was lost to me as my body turned into a raging inferno and a gust of wind propelled me out the door. Belford made my life painful enough when I was on time. One of the few downsides to regeneration, my teacher knew that I could regenerate from anything he dished out so long as he used a basic sword. I didn't need to give him an excuse to tan my hide any further. As soon as I was out of Clarissa's research laboratory, I shot towards the ceiling and followed the small braziers hanging there towards the training hall Belford would be waiting in. I still could not navigate by sight or sound when in this form. I could feel the area immediately around me by probing with my wind, but it was unreliable for navigating large distances. To allow myself to travel around the castle in my fire form, I set up a bunch of small beacons throughout the castle to help me get around. Every 10 or so feet, and at every intersection, there now hung a small iron brazier that burned with my fire. This ensured I had a map of the house I could access whenever I entered my fire form. It also meant I could rush as fast as I wanted along the ceiling without needing to worry about crashing through someone walking the halls. That may have been an issue in the past. I made sure to apologize, but I was still grounded for a week. 3. Why did my mother delight in grounding me so much? I didn't think she ever grounded Ruvel or Raquel, and I knew for a fact that she never grounded Ravel, my younger sister who was born just a few years ago. My parents absolutely adored Ravel. They spent almost as much time with her as they didn't with me. That wasn't something I was overly jealous about, though. I had other things to occupy my time. Really, I wasn't jealous. Forcefully shoving the illogical, childish jealousy down, I gave the best approximation a manifestation of fire was able to have sighed. Being young messed with my ability to let things go and my overall approach to pretty much everything. I just wanted to grow up already. Logically, I knew they cared. I was their son. They didn't need any reason to care other than that. 2. I refocused on my wind-propelled flight through the house. While I could have just shot out my wings and flown that way, I was faster like this. I loved my wings, but they were more for combat than anything else. I could still use my swords and magic with my wings out. While I was pure fire, I could do little other than run and heal, occasionally cutting something close to me with a wind blade or two and scorching someone with the hellfire I left in my wake. It wasn't a perfect means of transportation. I would still need to work something out for traveling outside the house, but it was sufficient to let me practice. Or, as it were, to get to my swordsmanship lessons as fast as possible. I exploded through the training hall's double doors like a ship, crashing through a wave, and quickly shifted out of my fire form. Training dummies and weapon racks lined the walls, but the stone floor itself was open, leaving a wide space for sparring. Various shapes were painted into the stone to help facilitate various training exercises. "You're late," a tall man in an elegant silver suit said. He had gray hair that was cut within an inch of his head and a full beard of the same color. A plain longsword was sheathed at his hip. His back was to me, but he turned around as I entered. "Summon your weapon, and we shall begin." Sir Belford wasn't one to waste time, especially when it came to swordplay. Father reincarnated him centuries ago. While he wasn't Knight of the Round, he did serve under King Arthur. After Camelot fell, he had nowhere to go and accepted my father's offer to join his peerage. He had served as my physical combat instructor since mother and father let me begin training. We mostly covered swordplay as it was his area of expertise, but he was also imparting his knowledge of various martial arts he had picked up over the years. 1. With a sigh, I conjured a flaming longsword and took up a stance opposite Belford. The following hours promised to be painful. 14 years old. I have mail, I said in surprise. I didn't have any friends, nor had I ever left the Phoenix grounds for any extended period of time. The concept that someone would write to me was a foreign one. Yes, my lord. It arrived just this morning. Yuri, one of my family's many servants, said as she curtsied and left. I stared suspiciously at the letter in my hand. Surely mother and father wouldn't have let it get to my hands if it was cursed, right? With a wave of my hand, a flame clone appeared. I took cover behind my dresser while the clone opened the letter. When nothing exploded, I peeked my head over the clone's shoulder and started reading. The letter was plain white with gold embroidery around the edges. The elegantly styled letters thanked me for taking the time to read the letter and requested a small allowance of my precious time to consider the prospect of taking the daughter of whoever sent this on as a pawn in my peerage. The amount of sunshine being blown up my rear was more than a little off-putting, but given whoever this was thought I was a run-of-the-mill, stuck-up pillar devil. Pillar devils being members of the 72 original noble devil clans. It was to be expected. What I didn't expect was for someone to write a request to get their kid in my peerage. I'd received my peerage pieces, small chess pieces of mastercraft alchemy that allowed me to reincarnate others into devil servants. Of course, pillar devils were exempted from the requirement of being a high-class devil before receiving them. It was one of the many ways the new Satans were trying to keep the old blood happy. Not that devil politics were overly impactful on my day-to-day life. I'd actually had my pieces for a couple of years now. I just hadn't really prioritized using them. I had lucked out by getting a mutation bishop, a special piece that would allow me to reincarnate anyone I used it on, regardless of how powerful they were. Typical pieces could only reincarnate someone of a certain strength ceiling, with that strength ceiling correlating to the point values of actual chess pieces. A queen was worth 9. A rook was worth 5. Knights and bishops were worth 3. And pawns were worth 1. It wasn't an exact crossover, but it was close enough to use as a guideline. 2. Honestly, I had expected to not get any mutation pieces. They were incredibly rare, so the fact that I got one, a useful piece at that, was a definite win in my book. My fire clone dispersed, letting the letter fall into my waiting hand as I considered its contents. There was an address above the signature, one Akira Gale. I had no idea who that was. Deciding I really didn't have anything better to do, I made my way down to Clarissa's study. On the way, I caught up to Yuri and told her to inform my parents what I was doing and where I was going. It was common sense to always give people who care about you a last known location when meeting suspicious people you have never met. I knocked on the door and walked inside when I was told to enter. "How may I help you, young lord?" she asked, casually setting aside a human skull she had been about to drop into a cauldron. This was fairly typical for her, so I didn't ask. I got a letter from someone I've never met asking me to consider their kid for my peerage. I don't really have anything better to do, so I was going to check it out, but I don't want to be alone in case there's an army of kidnappers or child murderers waiting for me. Clarissa blinked, then casually reached behind her and knocked the skull into the cauldron, causing a small amount of sickly green liquid to spill over the rim like foam bubbling over the rim of a tankard of beer. "I will gladly accompany you, my lord. Please give me a moment to prepare." She walked up to a bookshelf that slid to one side and headed into the secret room hidden behind it. I didn't know that was there. A few minutes later, Clarissa returned. In place of the plain black robe she was wearing before, she now wore a light set of hard, leather armor that was splotched with grays and browns. A hefty, burlap satchel was slung over her shoulder. It was likely stocked with various components she thought she might need to fend off child murderers. "I am prepared, my lord. Will you require anyone else to accompany you?" I shook my head. No, I just wanted someone who could stall long enough for me to teleport us away and send in the cavalry. You could do that well enough on your own. Teleportation wasn't instantaneous. You needed a good chunk of time to perform the ritual, which was why it was rarely used in combat, except to run away. It was also why I was so focused on perfecting my fire form. I needed a battle-applicable form of mobility that would let me keep up with people whose speed outclassed my own. Very well, my lord. Whenever you are ready. She stepped close to me and waited. Not seeing any reason to drag things out, I started casting a teleportation ritual. A large spell circle expanded out from underneath me to encompass both myself and Clarissa. With a flash of orange light, we disappeared from her study and reappeared on a street on the lower end of the low-class district of Lilith. Clarissa and I stood on a sidewalk adjacent to a cobbled road lined with small, crumbling houses. This was a very low-class area. It made me wonder how the people who sent the letter were able to afford to embroider the letter with actual gold. Double-checking the address on the letter, I confirmed that I was in the right place. The house wasn't much to look at. A one-story building with peeling red paint that was missing shingles. I looked up at Clarissa and said, "Does this seem like a trap to you?" Her eyes were narrow as she studied the building and the area surrounding us. "It is either a trap or an act of foolish desperation. Be prepared to flee in your other state. I will be able to look after myself until you return with aid." 3. I may have been the Lord, but she was the one experienced in deadly situations that put her in charge. I nodded my head, accepting her wisdom. Clarissa followed me up to the plain wooden door. I knocked 3 times, then stepped back, ready to run away if Clarissa told me to. The door opened slowly. A dark-haired man whose brown eyes hid behind spectacles poked his head out. "Yes. Hello. My name is Riser Phoenix. I received a letter requesting my presence in your home," I said, holding up the letter in question and doing my best to be cordial. I lost nothing by being polite. If he tried to kidnap me, Clarissa would force his intestines to eat themselves. She was scary like that. The man's eyes widened in shock as he immediately threw the door open, causing it to crash into something out of my eye line. "Of course, my lord. Thank you for your most precious time. Please come in." He bowed, stepping out of the door's threshold and motioning me to enter the house. Now that I had a better view of him, I could see he was wearing a fraying button-up shirt and a pair of stained slacks. I walked past him and took in a house. The entryway led to a sitting room and had a single table that the door had slammed into and knocked onto its side. The sitting room contained a couch and a single wooden chair arranged around a circular red carpet. "Please have a seat, my lord. I will retrieve refreshments for you," the man said as he closed the front door and rushed past us down another hall and out of our eye line. Clarissa and I exchanged a look, then sat down on the couch together. "I'm beginning to think this was a mistake," I said quietly to her as I noticed a bowling ball-sized, blackened hole in the drywall to our right. "We are not required to remain, my lord. If you wish to leave, we shall," Clarissa said, her tone not betraying her opinion on the matter, merely stating that we did possess the option to leave. Sighing, I said, "We're already here. We might as well see how this goes." "As you wish." A minute of awkward waiting later, the man returned with 2 others. The first was a woman with purple hair wearing a plain blue dress. She was carrying a tray of biscuits towards us. The final figure trailed behind the other 2. She was much younger even than me, if only by a year or so, giving me the sense that she was the duo's daughter. She had purple hair and eyes like her mother and was wearing a white dress. She began nervously wringing her hands as she saw Clarissa and I, stopping just behind her father as her mother held the tray out to us. This was seeming less and less like a trap every moment. I held up my hand as the woman held out the tray. "I hadn't come here to eat. Thank you, but we'll be fine." The woman bowed hurriedly and pulled away, holding the tray in her hands as the closest table to rest it on was currently lopsided after the door had knocked into it. Looking at the 2 women who had just entered the room, I said, "Hello, I am Riser Phoenix. May I inquire as to your names?" The woman bowed, awkwardly balancing the tray before her as she did. "My name is Siko, my lord. This is my daughter Ubeluna." The girl bowed as she was named, shaking slightly. Whether she was nervous or scared, I couldn't tell. 9. The man hastily bowed as well. And I am Akira, my lord. Forgive me for not introducing myself. 1. Do not worry about it, and please do not bow. It will be hard to maintain a conversation with people who will not look at me. The 3 all went ramrod straight almost immediately, causing me to hold in a sigh. This conversation was shaping up to be tedious. Your letter said you wish for me to take your daughter as my pawn. I said, cutting to the chase. Forgive me for being blunt, but why should I? The atmosphere turned tense the moment the words left my mouth. The family had appeared nervous before, but now they looked as if they were scared to breathe for fear of inviting my wrath down upon them. Akira swallowed heavily and said, She is young, my lord, but even so she has proven quite capable with magic. Ever since she was young, she has been able to create magical explosions with her power. Something clicked in my head, and I turned to the girl. That was caused by you then? I asked, pointing at the hole in the wall I'd noticed earlier. The girl opened her mouth to speak, but her father beat her to the punch. Yes, my lord. With respect, I cut him off. I wasn't talking to you. I turned away from the deathly pale man back to his daughter. Did you cause that? I repeated my question. She swallowed nervously, her hands shaking as she said, Why, yes, my lord. I did that accidentally when I was 4. I also burned the table at the same time, she added shyly. She has much better control now, her mother hurriedly added. She can even, once more, respectfully, I'm not talking to you. Could you please give me and your daughter a moment alone, please? I broke in, looking pointedly at both of her parents. If they were going to chime in every 5 seconds, this conversation wasn't going to get anywhere. There were things I needed to ask and things I needed to say before I even considered adding this girl. Her name was Yubaluna, if I heard her mother correctly, to my peerage. The girl's parents fled the room as if a dragon had suddenly appeared within it, leaving their daughter to look frantically at their backs before turning back to me with wide eyes. Yubaluna, right? I asked. She nodded. Then her eyes shot wider, and she said, Yes, my lord. She bowed, then quickly straightened her back again, a look of panic on her face. I sighed and started rubbing my head. Please just sit down. I'm not going to lash out at you for not saying or doing the right thing. Forget that my last name is Phoenix, and just talk to me. Yubaluna looked uncertainly between Clarissa and I, but when Clarissa offered no reaction whatsoever, she slowly sat down in the wooden chair across from us. Now, I would guess your parents are the ones who wrote the letter I received? I said, Yes, my lord. Then I guess my biggest question is, do you even want to join my peerage? Yubaluna's head tilted to the side in confusion. I don't understand, my lord. I took a deep breath. She's a 12-year-old, an actual 12-year-old. I pointedly reminded myself internally. It isn't her fault that she needs everything spelled out to her. Be patient, riser. Joining my peerage would mean you would become subservient to me. You would serve me. I would do everything in my power to treat you fairly, but you have no guarantees of that. And despite the fact that we don't publicize it, there are several lords who exploit the members of their peerage in various ways. My lord, I do not believe that is the correct direction to take this conversation if you wish to recruit her. Clarissa said chidingly. Am I wrong? You are not, my lord. Then I'm going to make sure she knows what she's getting into. I said, and Clarissa seemed to accept my words. Turning back to Yubaluna, who had watched our exchange in silence, I said, Your parents seem to want you to be in my peerage. Do you want to be in my peerage? Yubaluna swallowed again. A blind man could see she was nervous. Yes, my lord. I want to be in your peerage. Why? Yubaluna's face went blank at my question. I don't understand, my lord. Why do you want to be in my peerage? I want to serve you. I couldn't help it. I audibly sighed. Please don't lie to me again. You have no idea who I am. You hadn't met me before today. There is no way you want to serve me. Now, why do you want to join my peerage? Once more, Yubaluna looked at Clarissa, but the witch didn't so much as twitch. The girl turned back to me and took a deep breath, seeming to gather her courage. I want to be strong, she said hurriedly. When I didn't say anything, she kept going. I don't like being weak. The strong devils are trying to force us out of our home. We can't stand up to them. So Mom says we have a few months before they take everything. The strong devils will do whatever they want with us. I don't like that. Dad said if a peerage took me, I could be important, that I could be strong. I want to be able to stop people from taking things from me. Now, she had my attention. She was actually talking to me, not reading from a list of predetermined responses she'd practiced with her mother. Was I the first lord your parents sent a letter to? Your answer won't change anything. I'm just curious. I said, trying to be reassuring, because I really just wanted to know how desperate her parents were. Yubaluna shook her head. I don't know how many they tried. We've been selling things to pay for the letters. No one responded. Only you. That explained a lot, both with how the letter was paid for and why her parents were acting like zealots who would fall on their swords if I told them to. They wanted to give their daughter a better life than whatever was waiting for them, so they were spending their last months of freedom to try and get her into a peerage. I wasn't going to lie, their lives sounded rough, and I would probably do something to help them out regardless of how things went, but a sob story wasn't reason enough for me to let this girl into my peerage. There were some incredibly powerful people in this world that I remembered from my first life. I didn't have a cohesive list of everyone I wanted in my peerage, but I did have a general outline of potential choices. The name Yubaluna wasn't on it. That said, I was here anyway, so I figured I may as well dot my I's and cross my T's. You said that you made the hole in the wall and destroyed a table, right? Yes, my lord. How? Yubaluna looked away, refusing to meet my eyes. I blew it you up. Can you demonstrate? Not as opposed to do it in the house, she said, nervously rubbing her arm as she looked at the floor. I laughed. That's fine. We can go outside if it makes you more comfortable. She smiled, seemingly excitedly, and stood up. Okay, let's go to the yard. Her features morphed until she was looking at me with a horrified expression on her face. I mean, please follow me, my lord. She quickly corrected herself, shuffling from the room. This obsession with decorum was getting tedious. Clarissa, could you please tell her parents what we're doing so they don't think we kidnapped their daughter? Of course, my lord. I will be with you momentarily, she said as she stood. Walking down the hallway, Yubaluna's parents fled down. I stood and followed after Yubaluna, finding myself in a small yard. There was room to run, and it was proportional to the house, but it couldn't have been said to be large. The grass was all colored a dead brown. The only other notable feature was a single charred tree with no leaves that looked like a bony hand reaching up towards the sky. Yubaluna was shuffling nervously from foot to foot in the grass, staring at the tree as she muttered to herself. I wasn't close enough to hear what she was saying, but judging by everything else I'd seen of her, it was probably another product of her nerves. Gently, so as to avoid startling her too badly, I laid a hand on her shoulder and said, "Breathe. Take a deep breath and compose yourself. I'll wait." "Thank you, my lord." She responded reflexively, but I noticed her actually breathing now, so I took a step back and gave her a moment. Almost a full minute later, time enough for Clarissa to rejoin us and take up a position at my side, Yubaluna's parents nowhere to be seen. Yubaluna let out a purposeful breath and raised both of her arms. Raw, uncontrolled magic burst forth from her hands and slammed into the tree. A resounding booming sound like that of a cannon firing echoed throughout the area as the tree disappeared. One moment it was standing there in all of its decaying glory. The next it was swallowed by a massive ball of destructive force and fire. The next moment the fire was gone, the tree gone with it. It actually reminded me a little of the Bale power of destruction. The difference being Yubaluna hadn't erased the tree from existence like the Bale's power was known for doing, just annihilated it. A hum of appreciation from Clarissa told me all I needed to know about her opinion. She was hard to please and rare to show praise of any kind. Even something so minute as a small noise from her was equivalent to a shower of praise from another. I had to agree. That was pretty impressive. I wasn't capable of causing something to blow up that spectacularly. Granted, my explosions were a product of my much more powerful fire, but it was still impressive that Yubaluna was able to pull that off without having refined her spell through a circle. Her lack of formal training was plain to see. With formal training, she would likely be even more impressive. Sadly, one attack was not enough to justify giving her a piece, even a pawn. If it was all she could do to launch one attack, no matter how devastating, all anyone would have to do to stop her was to dodge that attack, then strike her when she was exhausted. 5. I turned away from the destruction caused by her spell to the girl in question, and I raised an eyebrow, impressed. She did not look tired in the slightest. In fact, she was smiling. For the first time since I'd met her, she seemed to be in her element, relaxed, excited. "Can you do that again?" I asked, drawing her attention to me. She turned to me, still smiling, and nodded. "Yes, my lord, but I have no target." I studied her for a moment, wondering how many more of those blasts she had in her. With a wave of my hand, a flaming tree appeared where the dead one had once stood. "Strike the targets as they appear," I ordered. Yubaluna's smile turned to a predatory grin as she gathered her magic again. Much faster this time, almost immediately, another explosion shook our surroundings as the area around my fiery tree was sundered. Immediately, I created another on the other side of the yard. Yubaluna switched targets and destroyed that one as well. Then the next. Then the next. This continued for nearly 2 minutes until Yubaluna was huffing from exhaustion, her body swaying as she desperately tried to stay on her feet. Even still, she held her shaking arms high, waiting for my next target. "That's enough. You should go get a drink and catch your breath." She shook her head. "I can keep going, my lord. I can still." "Yubaluna, take a break. Trust me, I get where you are coming from, but you're exhausted. Take a few minutes to recover. I'll still be here when you get back. You have my word. Take her," Clarissa said immediately. "I doubt a pawn will be sufficient, but take her all the same. Give me even a month with the girl, and I can triple her combat potential. Once she knows how to focus her magic through a circle, she will be a fearsome opponent." I nodded along with her words. That's what I had put together. Still, I'm not going to take her for her power's sake alone. It would be rather comedic for everyone other than myself if my first piece turned on me after she'd decided she'd taken all she could from me. If she tried, she would die, Clarissa said with certainty as strong as steel. "Make sure to remind me to compensate her parents for the yard," I said, my mind moving to other things. "I will do so, my lord." The door to the house opened once more, and Yubaluna emerged with her parents behind her. Yubaluna still looked tired, but at least she didn't look like she was about to pass out like she had earlier. She also wore a determined look on her face, as if she was prepared for the world to collapse around her. I ignored the presence of her parents, focusing solely on her. "Why should I take you into my peerage?" Yubaluna's determined demeanor did not shift. "My lord, you've already seen my—" "Disregard your power," I said, cutting her off. "If your power wasn't enough to impress me, what reason would you offer for me to take you into my peerage?" Now her determined visage cracked, giving way to a fear-filled desperation. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. She violently closed her mouth, schooling her expression. Her eyes narrowed. Then she knelt before me, bowing her head so her gaze was fixed on the ground. "I will do whatever you ask of me, my lord. I will be your weapon to wield against any enemy. Your will shall be my purpose." That was far too eloquent for a 12-year-old. This was another one of the things her parents practiced with her, wasn't it? Sighing, I sat down in front of her, crossing my leg beneath me as I did. When we were on the same level, I said, "Let me be upfront with you, Yubaluna. After this demonstration, even if I leave without taking you, devils will be tripping over themselves to have you in their peerage." Yubaluna looked up in surprise, her eyes widening as her parents gasped behind her, but I continued before any of them could say anything. "You have potential, a lot of potential. All the big-name devils will know I was here because they're nosy like that. They'll know I didn't blow up the yard, and when paired with all of the letters your parents sent, they'll figure out I was here to see you. They'll bid against one another until they offer to buy each of your parents a mansion and cover you in so many jewels you'll shine like an earthbound star. You have the option to walk away and still get what you want." Now, any sensible, manipulative devil would never tell her this. They'd make her beg and plead and offer everything she had for a place in their peerage that they would then graciously offer her. The problem with that strategy was they'd acquire a slave who would eventually grow to resent them. I didn't want that. I wanted someone who willingly entered my service and wouldn't leave it. Anything less would just cause me a massive headache for me down the line. If Little Miss Explosion didn't take my offer knowing others were available, I didn't want her anyway. Maybe that made me a bad devil, but I was all right with that. Riser Phoenix, breaking down stereotypes, since, did I seriously not know what year it was? Not important. 2. With all of that in the open, I continued. I'll ask you the same question I did when your parents first left the room. Do you want to be in my peerage? Yubaluna looked uncertain. She briefly looked over at her parents. They seemed to be holding their breath as they held each other close, before she turned back to me, her uncertainty gone. She had made up her mind. Yes, she said, raising an eyebrow in surprise. I said, why? I'm not offering your parents mansions. I'm also not offering you enough gems to gleam like a star. Others would. Yubaluna shook her head. They wouldn't want me. They would just want me to do what they want. I wouldn't be able to be me. They'd make me what they want. My other eyebrow rose up to join the first. That was a very simplistic way to say something incredibly insightful. For the first time since I'd arrived at her house, I looked at Yubaluna. When a devil was genuinely considering making someone a member of their peerage, they would know how valuable that person was and what they would need to spend in order to reincarnate them. I was surprised to find there were only 2 pieces I could use on Yubaluna to change her without using up almost all of my pawns. She had even more potential than I initially thought. 1. I held both of my hands palm up in front of me, and a small flame lit above each palm. When the fires faded, 2 chess pieces were resting atop my hands in the fire's place. I heard 2 gasps and an interested hum as Yubaluna's parents couldn't believe their eyes, and Clarissa realized what I was offering. Yubaluna's eyes had gone wide as saucers as they rapidly shifted between the bright red, small, glowing piece in my left hand and the elegant, crimson piece in my other. Before you say anything, let me explain a few things, I said, forestalling any exclamations from anyone, though my words were directed at Yubaluna. This, I said, lifting up my left hand and the mutation bishop sitting on it, is a bishop. I'm sure you already know that, but let me explain what it means to me. If I give you this, I'll expect you to help me in any and all of my mystical endeavors. I have a lot of plans regarding magic, and they will all take a lot of dedicated time and toil to come to fruition. You would be instrumental in facilitating that. Do you understand? Yubaluna nodded. Then her eyes slowly panned over to the piece in my other hand. Raising my right hand, I said, "This is my queen." Again, I'm sure you know what it is, but it also means something different to me. If I give you this piece, you would become my right hand. You would rarely leave my side, and even then it would most often be on my orders. When I am indisposed, you would issue orders in my place. I would also expect you to take up some form of martial combat. Hand-to-hand, swords, axes, spears. The specific form wouldn't matter much to me, but if I were to boost all of your abilities with this, I would expect you to use that boost. I would also expect you to tell me when I'm being an idiot. I heard shocked exclamations from her parents and a chuckle from Clarissa at my declaration, but I pushed on. I'm not naive enough to think I will always be right in everything I do, and I'm not arrogant enough to think I'll always be able to tell when those times are. So, the duty of smacking me upside the head when I'm being stupid, even if it pisses me off, falls to my queen. This, I hefted the piece higher for effect, represents the most responsibility. I raised the bishop above the queen. This represents a lot of responsibility, but quite a bit of freedom as well. If neither of these are attractive to you. The 2 pieces disappeared in 2 great balls of fire, leaving 7 pawns in their place. 4. Before I could get a word in, Yubaluna shouted, "No," leaning forward and grasping futilely at the fading fire of my right hand. Tilting my head curiously, I watched her reaction as I banished my pawns, recalling a single piece. When the fire faded, the only piece present was my queen. Yubaluna's eyes bore into it hungrily, like a tiger observing its prey before it struck. Her arms quivered as an emotion flitted across her face that I couldn't quite decipher. Expectation? Desire? I held the piece between my thumb and index finger and lifted it up to her eye level. "Are you sure? You know what I'll expect of you." Euboluna's eyes panned up to my own, and she nodded her head, determined. I won't fail, my lord. The corner of my mouth pulled upwards in a half-grin. I found my queen. 12. I stood up and offered the still kneeling girl my hand. She took it hesitantly, and I pulled her to her feet. Pull down the front of your dress, I said. Wordlessly, Eubeluna undid a fastener I hadn't even seen and pulled her dress down much further than necessary until it was almost down to her belly button. She wasn't wearing a bra, sparing only a quick look at her chest, but remaining as respectful as possible. I pressed my queen into her chest. 9. Eubeluna gasped as the piece faded into her chest, her eyes flying wide as power racked her form. Her purple eyes glowed a piercing violet as magic flowed through her body. Simultaneously, her muscles contracted and seemed to bulge. Several seconds passed, and the change ended. Eubeluna fell to her knees once more, breathing heavily. I knelt down next to her and pulled her dress back up to her shoulders. I had no idea where the fastener was, and I wasn't going to go digging around for it. So while she was covered, there was now a rather noticeable V-shape in the front of her dress. I try not to look, but hormonal teenage devil bodies were specifically designed to combat restraint. How do you feel? I asked as I helped her to her feet. When she looked up at me, there were tears in her eyes. I was beginning to think something had gone wrong when she smiled and said, "Thank you." I smiled back. "Come, my queen, let's go home," with a few parting orders to Clarissa to make sure she fixed the yard to be spotless. I wasn't going to leave it destroyed with Eubeluna in my peerage, as it would only let others know just how powerful my queen was, as well as to request whoever was harassing Eubeluna's family to back off. I cast a teleportation ritual and transported Eubeluna and myself back to the Phoenix estate. 2. Mother and father were waiting in the hall, with Ruvel and Ravel when the two of us arrived. "So, son, what did you find during your trip?" father said. His eyes drifted to Eubeluna. "And who is this?" "This is Eubeluna. She's my queen," I answered, causing all eyes to shoot to Eubeluna. Eubeluna herself froze under all the attention, her breathing growing erratic as 4 separate phoenixes studied her. Ruvel and Ravel with curiosity, father and mother with disapproval bordering on contempt. "That wasn't good." "Your queen?" Ruvel asked, taking Eubeluna in. "I don't believe you would be one to waste your queen piece, little brother." Ruvel approached Eubeluna and said, "Tell me, what made my brother so interested in you?" Eubeluna looked at me with wide, frightened eyes, but I just nodded toward my brother. If she was to be my queen, she couldn't defer to me in something as simple as a family meeting. With her hands clasped tight in front of her, Eubeluna said, I make things explode, my lord." There was a solid 5 seconds of silence before loud, boisterous laughter echoed through the hall. All eyes turned towards Ruvel, who was wiping a tear from his eye. That would do it. My brother has a certain fondness for explosions. Extending his hand, he said, "It's a pleasure to meet you, Eubeluna. Feel free to call me Ruvel." 3. I really like your hair, Ravel said in a bubbly voice, trotting up in front of Eubeluna. "What products do you use?" With the tense atmosphere gone, Eubeluna began to relax. Ravel and Ruvel fussed about, trying to get her to spill her life story, but mother and father stood away from the rest of us, their eyes looking down upon me disapprovingly. I was curious what they thought of the situation, but in the end, it didn't matter. I made my decision, and I didn't regret it. Later that evening, after Eubeluna had been thoroughly vetted by Ravel and Ruvel, she sat with me in my room, her eyes wide as she took everything in. "What do you think?" I asked as I sat down next to her. Her eyes fell away from the over-opulent room to rest on me. "Am I dreaming?" she said, sounding more than a little scared. I smiled. "No, you're not dreaming. This is real. You're my queen, and unless you grow dissatisfied here, I will never trade you. Welcome home." Using a trick I'd been working on for a while, I conjured a small flame in my hand. The flame condensed into a teardrop shape and solidified, falling into my palm. I held the resulting stone out to her. Eubeluna reached out hesitantly and picked up the vibrant, orange stone fashioned for my fire. "So long as you have that, I'll always be able to find you. You'll never have to worry about being alone again." Unless, of course, you don't want me to bug you. Then drop it in a drawer for however long you need. I finished jokingly, but her eyes didn't stray from the stone in her grasp. Fearing I'd overstepped or made her uncomfortable somehow, I said, Yubaluna. Her eyes snapped up to me and a wide smile spread across her face. She launched herself towards me and wrapped me in a tight hug. I was so shocked, I barely heard her whispered, "Thank you." 17 years old. Sighing, I closed the book in front of me and pushed it aside. It wasn't like I was reading it anyway. My mind was too focused on other things. "Are you well, my lord?" Yubaluna asked from where she stood to the right of my desk. The stone I'd given her the day I made her my queen hanging from a black cord around her neck. She hadn't taken it off since she'd fashioned it into a necklace. 1. The necklace was not the only change to her wardrobe. In place of the torn rag she'd been wearing when I'd met her, she now wore a simple yet elegant purple and blue dress. Her hair had grown out and now hung below her shoulders. I waved her concern away. "I'm fine, Yubaluna. I told you, you can go train if you want. I won't be doing anything for a while." "My place is here, my lord," she said, unmoving. I couldn't help the small smile that grew on my face as I leaned back and looked at her. She'd grown a lot over the last few years. We both had, and my parents wanted to take advantage of that fact. I remembered Riser's marriage contract from the anime, but I hadn't put it together that it would now concern me. My parents wanted a phoenix with the power of destruction in addition to our other powers, so they were setting me up to be married off to the Gremory family. From their perspective, they likely thought they were doing me a favor. I was their third son and set up to inherit nothing as a result. My younger sister Ravel would get more than me. Not that I really cared about material possessions, but mother and father thought I was going through a phase. They'd orchestrated my marriage, so I would wed Rias Gremory and become Lord Gremory when she took her place at the head of the family. The only problem with this master plan was that I was never consulted. I had never met Rias, and what little I remembered of her from the anime saw her as a manipulative, incompetent, selfish brat who stumbled around like a ditzy bimbo, complaining that the world was out to get her specifically. That kind of thing may have left most men slobbering over themselves for the slightest glance from her. But, to me, it was more off-putting than anything else. I wasn't attracted to the clingy, incompetent act she had going for her. A woman who was a tad possessive of me was hotter than hell, but a woman who literally couldn't function without me was a migraine. 19. Massaging my temples, I said, "What am I supposed to do here, Yubaluna?" "You could start by saying thank you." Both Yubaluna and I turned to see Ruvel leaning against my open door frame, an amused smile on his lips. "Mother and father are looking out for you, little brother. It may seem a little sudden, but in 10 or so years you'll be thanking them." He pushed off the door frame and walked into my room. A strange series of emotions I couldn't parse quickly flew across Yubaluna's face, but she bowed her head and backed away before I could comment, clearing Ruvel's path to me. I know that was their intent. I said to Ruvel, trying to be diplomatic, "I'm thankful for the thought, but I've never met this girl. All I know about her is that she has the power of destruction. If I wanted to get married to someone for no reason other than their power, I'd go after Seraphol Leviathan." 7. Ruvel's eyes lit up as he sat down on my bed across from my desk, chuckling softly. "This is why I love you, Riser. You say the most impossible things with the utmost seriousness. It almost makes me believe you could actually get the Leviathan to marry you." He leans forward, resting his elbows on his knees. His smile is still in place, but his demeanor has clearly shifted to a more serious one. "Speaking plainly, little brother, I understand that you're a little out of sorts right now. You've never met Rias, and until yesterday, all you ever really thought about was what to practice next." I scowled at that. "I think of more than just training, Ruvel." Raising an eyebrow at me, Ruvel said, "And pray tell, what was the outcome of the most recent raiding game?" I roll my eyes. "You know, I only ever pay attention to yours. All the rest are boring once I've seen enough to know how they fight." Ruvel snapped his fingers. "And that, little brother, is why mother and father didn't consult you on this. It isn't about what's boring. It's about looking towards the future. You may not enjoy the more subtle aspects of our culture, but they are far more important than you realize." Now it was my turn to raise an eyebrow. Me not watching a rating game between two stuck-up assholes is significant, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Ruvel's gaze was serious as he said, yes. The Bale heir doesn't care who watches his fights, but his father, Lord Bale, does. He takes notes of the attendance of each match and who they support. Mother and father grew concerned when Lord Bale asked after you, and decided it was time to throw you to the political wolves, as they say. Now I was just confused. Why would Lord Bale care if I show up or not? I'm basically an ant next to him. Ruvel shrugged, sitting back up on my bed, illustrating just how much taller than me he was. I was close to 6 feet tall by this point in my life, but Ruvel was closer to 7. It's not about you choosing not to show up. It is about our mother and father's inability to make you attend to support his son. At least in Lord Bale's eyes anyway. If they don't care enough to make you attend, then they must not care about their relations with his house. I blinked, tried to absorb that stupidity. That is insane. The corner of Ruvel's lip pulled upward as he said, that is politics, little brother. The marriage contract is your first taste of a very unpleasant cake that everyone must partake of. If you truly do not want to marry Rias, it is up to you to figure out a way to nullify the contract without stepping on anyone's toes. I suggest you at least meet with her first, though. If the marriage goes through, you have a pillar lordship to look forward to. Who knows? You may fall in love at first sight. I've heard she's very beautiful. I sighed at my brother's waggling eyebrows. Having nice tits does not mean she would make a good partner. I'd actually say it makes her less desirable. She'll have spent her entire life being showered with praise. I don't want to deal with an ego that large. 1. Shaking his head fondly, Ruvel stood up and reached out to mess up my hair. That, brother, is why father worries about you. You put far too much thought into everything other than what you should be thinking about. Maybe everyone else just has their priorities messed up. I admit, it is a possibility, but my money's on the 1,000-year-old devils who have been doing this for longer than twice both our lives combined. Putting a hand comfortingly on my shoulder, he leaned down to my eye level and said, at least meet with her. What harm is there in that? 4. I held his gaze for a moment before sighing. Fine. I'll invite her to lunch or something. Maybe she'll agree to dissolve the contract. Ruvel grinned and ruffled my hair once more. There you go, little brother. Try not to let your eyes wander away from hers. With a parting nod to Eubeluna, who had yet to move from the corner she'd retreated to when Ruvel entered, my brother left, closing the door behind him. You know you don't have to hide from my brother, right? I said, looking at Eubeluna as she walked back to my side. It would be improper to interrupt your time with your brother, my king. I'm the king of this peerage, right? Eubeluna's eyebrows furrowed in confusion, but she nodded. Then that means I make the rules for this peerage, and I say you can act however you want around my brother. Seriously, I need to get Clarissa to spend less time on etiquette lessons and more time on magical explosion lessons. Since Eubeluna had moved into the manor, Clarissa had taken the girl under her wing, and Eubeluna was improving rapidly as a result. Leaning back in my chair, I couldn't help but sigh. Would you be willing to go with me when I meet Rias? I really don't want to do the awkward socializing thing alone. I go wherever you need me, my king. Smiling, I grabbed Eubeluna's hand and gave it a comforting squeeze. Thanks, Eub. I don't say enough, but I really appreciate you. It was the truth. I'd spent the majority of my life either alone or with adults. While my mental age dwarfed Eub, it was still nice to be around someone who was my physical age. She made for a good sparring partner and conversationalist when we were away from my family. In a manner, she maintained her professional demeanor, out of fear of my mother and father's poorly hidden disapproval if my suspicions were right. But when we ventured out on rare occasions, she'd open up. It was nice to have a friend again. 4. Eubeluna blushed and gently pulled her hand away. Thanks are not necessary, my king. It is I who owes you. She was referring to what I'd done for her parents. Despite what I told her when I took her as my queen, I did actually help her parents. I would have had to be a major asshole to leave them in that rotting house. They weren't living in a mansion by any means, but they were comfortable, and I made sure they both got new jobs. I waved her words away. Enough of that. Let's just agree we're both appreciative of one another and move on. I pulled a piece of paper and pen from a drawer in my desk and started scribing a letter. Let's see what kind of person my future wife is. X. Growing irritated, I checked my watch again. Rias was now 1 hour and 20 minutes late for our lunch. If she waited any longer to show up, we would be having dinner instead. Perhaps she was called away by an emergency? Yubaluna said, trying to sound genuine. Or, the much more likely scenario, she just doesn't give a shit about our time. Just as I was getting ready to wave down the waiter to get another drink, the door to the establishment opened and 2 figures entered. The first was a little taller than 5 feet and had bushy red hair that fell down below her waist. Her companion was of similar height, but her hair was black, bound in a ponytail, and not quite as long as the first. Both figures wore matching clothes, a white button-up shirt and a maroon skirt cutaway to high up their legs. The right breeze would reveal everything. Taking a deep breath to banish the simmering fury at the disrespect of being made to wait this long, I put on my best smile and stood to greet them as they walked over to our table. Eris Gremory, it is a pleasure to meet you. My name is Riser Fee Dash. I was cut off as the girl with red hair picked up Yubaluna's half-finished drink and threw the glass in my face, covering me in sparkling water and shattered glass. The cuts in my face began to sear themselves, close the moment they were made. Yubaluna stood so abruptly her chair shattered under the force of her strength. She brought her hands up and began casting something, but a single signal from me stopped her dead in her tracks. I would not be drawn into a fight in a public setting where collateral damage was a certainty. All activity in the restaurant stopped as the pillar heiress leaned towards me, glaring hatefully as she spat. I will never marry you, you scumbag. Without another word, she spun on her heel and stormed off, her henchwoman following behind her after shooting me a venom-filled glare. 7. A small part of me noticed several cameras capturing the exchange, but I was too pissed off to care. I needed to not be in this restaurant anymore. Yup, would you be so kind as to pay for our drinks and give a generous tip for wasting the waiter's time? I will meet you back at the manor. Not waiting for a reply, I cast a lengthy teleportation spell and reappeared back at the Phoenix estate. Finally, a voice called as I appeared. I expected you half an hour ago. How did it go? Ruval trailed off as he took in my soaked shirt and overall pissed off demeanor. What happened, little brother? My arms were shaking, but I forced myself to take several deep breaths. I was mad, but it was better to channel that rage into something useful than to let it consume me. Ruval, I need an exact copy of the marriage contract mother and father signed with the Gremory family. I'm going to find a way to annul this marriage if it fucking kills me. Ruval winced. That bad. The look I shot him must have shown I wasn't in the mood for jokes because he said, I'll get you one, before quickly leaving. As he was leaving, a dark teleportation circle shattered next to me, and Yub stepped forward with a napkin from the restaurant we were just at. I hope you paid for that, I said as Yub began to wipe the blood and drink off my face. I did, my king. Yub looked over her shoulder towards the hallway. Ruval retreated down, before leaning close and feverishly whispering, Why did you stop me, Riser? That bitch Dash was looking for a fight, and she got one. But I'll be damned before I fight on her terms. We are going to dismantle her, but we're not going to let her pick her battles. She's fighting my war now. 1. Yubaluna looked like she wanted to say something else, but she bit her tongue and continued to help me clean my face. I hadn't expected my meeting with Rias Gremory to go well, but that was completely unjustifiable. I was going to make her bleed. Riser, don't you think this is a little rash? Mother tried to reason with me as she looked uncertainly between the paper I'd handed her and me. Rash isn't telling your son he's getting married after the agreement was already made? I said, my voice dripping with displeasure. Riser, you will speak to your mother respectfully. Do you understand? Father yelled as he stood from his chair. Grudgingly meeting his eyes, I said, Yes, sir. Father held my gaze a moment longer before retaking his seat. Son, I understand your first meeting did not go well. She showed up over an hour late, threw my queen's drink in my face, called me a scumbag, and left, making sure everyone around recorded it so the entire underworld could see it. If that's not going well, I'd hate to see what poorly would entail. Father narrowed his eyes and said, You will not interrupt me again. Your first meeting did not go well, but that does not mean you should dissolve the contract. In time, she will accept you, and you will become Lord Gremory. A phoenix will be Lord Gremory. That is what you stand to lose. What we stand to lose. I couldn't bring myself to care about a phoenix being Lord Gremory. I was not going to torture myself for eternity by marrying that woman just so my parents' influence grew. I'm not going to marry someone just to get a fancy title, especially if that person is going to treat me like dirt. I have more self-respect than that. From his place, sitting next to me, Ruvel coughed politely. Father, if I may, the whole of the underworld currently views Riser as a weak fool unwilling to defend his own honor. As a phoenix, he must respond to this slight. When I'd asked him to help me get mother and father to agree, I was surprised with how quickly he'd agreed to help me. Then he showed me the video and the reaction of the majority of the underworld, and it made sense. He was the one who'd told me how important politics and appearances were, and mine had just been dropped into a toilet. The fact that he was associating my public humiliation with the Phoenix name was how he planned to get mother and father to agree to this. I just hoped it worked because my method had obviously failed. Mother turned to Ruvel with her nose held high. I doubt that the Phoenix name is associated with. Without looking up from her phone, Ravel said, "When did the Phoenixes become such pussies? Who's a good little Phoenix bitch? You are. Phoenix can suck my." "Ravel," Mother interrupted. Ravel shrugged as she put her phone away. "It's not my fault the internet is a vulgar place. If you don't want everyone to laugh at us for the next 100 years, you need to let Riser do this." She had to plan this out. I don't know what she thinks Riser did or plans to do to her, but she's going after all of us to get back at him for something. Turning to me, my sister said, "You really should have slapped the shit out of her." "One. Ravel," Mother shrieked again. Even with my mother screaming like a harpy, I couldn't help but snort in amusement at my little sister's assessment. Then I'd have been an abusive scumbag instead of just a scumbag. That's why I need to do this. Not only will it nullify the marriage, but it'll let me fight her in an official setting. "Riser," Father began as he rubbed his forehead tiredly. "She has 3 strong peerage pieces, a queen with lightning magic, a sacred gear user, and a melee fighter trained by Surtur. That isn't even mentioning the power of destruction. All you have is a useless piece of eye candy. You will lose. Badly. 2. Clenching my fist under the table to avoid biting back at him about Ubeluna. She was not eye candy. I took a deep breath and said, "So, I should just let her get away with this?" If this interaction was any indication, she'll just keep doing it. Her plan is probably to drag my and the Phoenix family's reputations through the mud, so her parents decide it would be detrimental to let the marriage go through and break it off. I refuse to let her do that to me, and I refuse to let her do that to my family. A rating game is the only way I can gain total control of the contract and dissolve it. So I will fight her, and I will not lose. "Father, let him fight," Ruvel said, once more doing his best to sound diplomatic, but it was clear his emotions were starting to get the better of him. "I want what's best for Riser too, and I don't think a wife who treats him like this, no matter what she offers him, will be good for him." Everyone fell silent while they contemplated Ruvel's words. "Oh look," Ravel broke the silence, her phone once again in her hands. "There's a new hashtag. Hashtag whipped Phoenix bitch. It's already trending." If she noticed the looks directed her way, she did a great job of pretending she didn't, but I was pretty sure she was too focused on finding each and every detrimental thing being said about me, so she could hold them over my head later. She was conniving like that. With a heavy sigh, Father said, "Fine, I will speak with Lord Gremory and arrange a rating game between you and Rias. But be prepared for her to hold control of the contract and publicly humiliate you again. I do not believe you can beat her, Riser. Be sure this defeat is placed solely on your own head. Keep the Phoenix name removed from your spat with your fiancé." 6. Starting to grow offended, I stood up and said, "You haven't overseen my training in years. Neither of you have taken an active role in anything I've done since you pawned me off on Clarissa. Even Belford stopped caring once he felt I was competent. No one, not even you, has any idea what I can do. The only one who really paid attention to me was Clarissa. I've never left the castle because I have trained every day. Do not insult my capabilities. I will not lose. And I'm going to embarrass her. I didn't bother waiting for a response. I walked right out of the dining hall and made my way to my room. When I arrived, I found Yubaluna waiting for me. 3. What did they decide, my king? She asked, the picture of professionalism. I closed and locked the door behind me, then walked straight up to Yubaluna and pulled her into a hug. My king, what? You're not a piece of eye candy, I said, interrupting her. I wouldn't have made you my queen just for your looks. You're beautiful, but that's not why I chose you. I saw your strength. I saw your potential. And I saw that you would be loyal. That's why I chose you. Ignore my father. Everyone else may not have known she was listening at the door, but she hadn't taken off the necklace she'd made out of the stone I gave her. So long as she wore it, I would know where she was. Yubaluna stood stock still for a moment longer. Then her arms shakily rose to return the hug. What have I done wrong? Why do they hate me so much? She asked meekly, tears beginning to fall down her cheeks as she buried her head in my shoulder. 1. I don't know, and I don't care. Their opinions don't matter. We're going to fight Rias's peerage, and we're not just going to win. We're going to humiliate them. The whole underworld will see who you are. Who we are. I pulled back a little and pushed her chin up, so she was looking me in the eye. Moisture trailed down her cheek like a window in a storm, but even so she focused on me. We are going to win. Do you hear me? She nodded almost imperceptibly and mutely said, We're going to win, Riser. I smiled and pulled her in close. Damn right. X. All things told, I'd expected this to take a lot longer to set up. Admittedly, my experience with raiding games boiled down to sitting in a box every once in a while Ruval thrashed whoever his opponent was with little to no help from his peerage. But I honestly thought it would take at least a couple weeks to have a match scheduled. In actuality, it took all of 5 days. I was willing to bet a large part of that was the stadium owners trying to cash in on all the drama surrounding mine and Rias's engagement before public interest died down, but apparently the fact that I was the challenger sped things up quite a bit as well. As I was the lesser party because I was outnumbered, I was permitted a set amount of time to prepare, but I decided to waive that right in favor of expediency. Now, we were just minutes away from entering the arena. Remember, do not trust your regeneration against the power of destruction. It is unlikely to cancel your immortality, but it is possible the effects of your bloodline will be slowed by a direct hit. Do everything in your power to avoid any of Rias Gremory's attacks. Clarissa said, trying to get in some last-minute coaching before Yubaluna and I would enter the battlefield. Don't worry, Clarissa. We'll be fine, I said, trying to assuage her worries. Clarissa narrowed her eyes at me and huffed a disappointed sigh. It is that arrogance that will cause you to lose this match. Your skills reflect on those who taught you. Therefore, if you lose, I will lose, and I cannot tolerate that. 2. Smirking, I raised an eyebrow at her and said, So that's the only reason you care? Your reputation is on the line. Clarissa held her gruff aura a second longer before allowing herself to smile. Perhaps I'm the slightest bit fond of the both of you. Yubaluna chuckled merrily and ran up to give Clarissa a quick hug. Don't worry, we're going to kick their asses. Ladies and gentlemen. A cultured, professional voice echoed around us. It's time. Protect each other and do not let me down. Clarissa gave us one last nod of encouragement before a teleportation circle appeared beneath her and whisked her away. I would like to welcome you all to the raiding game between Rias Gremory and Riser Phoenix. As many of you know, my name is Graphia Lucifuge, and I will be officiating this game. I didn't know the sister-in-law of my opponent would be the ref. Conflict of interest much? I said aloud, and Yubaluna hummed in agreement, but didn't comment. Today's game will follow the standard raiding game rules and take place in a setting chosen by the challenge party. Rias Gremory has elected to fight in a simulated version of Kuo Academy. The participants will now be transported into the arena. A column of blue light enveloped Yubaluna and I. One moment we were standing in the waiting area, the next we were in what appeared to be a classroom. Home field advantage. I thought I was supposed to be the one who had advantages like this? Aren't I the one who is outnumbered? I said aloud. I wasn't really talking to anyone specific, but now that I was in the arena, I was certainly being recorded and watched. I was playing my reactions up for the audience. This does not change our plan, my king. Yubaluna said calmly as she walked to a window to survey our surroundings. Nor does it change the outcome of the game. Walking over to join her, I said, "No, I guess it doesn't." Looking out the window, I saw tin dirt leading away from the building I was in. There was a swing set sat atop the dirt, and a patch of vibrant green grass beyond that. Beyond the grass, at least half a mile away, was another building. That was likely where Rias and her peerage had been transported. The participants will be allotted 10 minutes to plan and organize before the battle begins. Graphia's voice once more echoed around us, but left just as quickly. "What do you suspect they will do, my king?" Yubaluna asked as we stared out the window together. "That depends," I answered non-committedly. "On what?" "Whether or not they're smart." Yubaluna turned from the window to look at me in confusion. "My king, if they were smart, they'd be using Rias's knight's sword birth to trap literally everywhere. That sacred gear is undersold only because its users have been massive idiots. It allows you to create any sword you can think of within some staggeringly variable limits, including enchantments, yet its wielders only ever use it to make pointy sticks. If Rias's knight were smart, he'd create a bunch of swords enchanted to explode when anyone not in his peerage passed them. Then there's the potential to create rope traps, electrocution traps, pit traps. Honestly, you could make just about any trap with that sacred gear. All they'd have to do then would be to take a few pot shots at us to let us know where they are, wait for us to charge, and then pelt us from range with lightning and destruction, while even more swords debilitate us, and their melee fighter stops us from progressing beyond their trapped kill zone. Their numbers and the overwhelming variety of power stacked against us would bring down almost any two fighters that came against them. But not us. One. I shrugged. Even if they were smart and did that, we'd still probably win. Yubaluna thought over that for a moment. And what will they actually do, my king? Probably split up like a bunch of idiots, separating the melee fighters from their range support and their range fighters from their frontline protection, while the knight with sword birth makes a pointy stick to wave in our general direction. Rias will probably sit in her main base and drink a pina colada while we easily mow through her peerage. Then make some speech about how we're awful people for hurting the peerage she's sent against us, as she throws a poorly controlled temper tantrum that does more damage to the surroundings than it does to us. 2. Yubaluna let out a disappointed sigh and looked back out the window. When you put it that way, my king, it sounds rather boring. I expected to finally be able to cut loose. Chuckling, I said, "You'll be able to. The fight just won't last very long." Yubaluna and I spent the remainder of the 10-minute preparation period in silence. There wasn't much prep we needed to do. The moment we'd arrived, I began to slowly spread small, pinhead-sized pieces of my fire throughout the entirety of the arena to give me markers to sense and fire shift towards. They weren't all in position yet, but they were spread out enough to give me some mobility. Outside of that, the two of us didn't have any battlefield control to prepare or any major buff spells. Once I was finished here, I really needed to build up my peerage, so we had more variety than 2 heavy-hitting cannons. A scalpel or 2 would be a really nice addition to our roster. Our lack of versatility was our biggest weakness right now, but Rias's pieces weren't strong enough to take advantage of it. Everything I'd read about her and her peerage in preparation for this match painted the same picture. Rias and her friends spent all of their time playing school in the human world. She'd coasted along on the absurdity of the Bales family power her entire life. She had yet to learn a lesson I'd learned from watching the anime. If you only had a big stick, eventually someone with a bigger stick would come along and annihilate you. On paper, the power of destruction was stronger than hellfire and wind combined, but that was only on paper. I trained for over a decade to hone myself into a weapon of mass destruction. Rias had played school. I wouldn't be facing the plot-hardened peerage of Rias Gremory that existed in the fight against Loki and later went on to face truly absurd forces. I was fighting a bunch of kids who'd never learned how to properly throw a punch. If I lost, I deserved to have Rias humiliate me. It would mean the last 10 years of my life were completely useless. The 10-minute preparatory period has ended. Let the rating game begin. Graphia's voice spoke once again. Her final sentence was followed by several loud bangs as magical fireworks detonated around the outskirts of the arena. Smiling sidelong at Yubaluna, I held out my arm. "Shall we, my queen?" Yubaluna smiled back and snaked her arm through mine. "It will be a pleasure, my king." Two wings of roaring flame shot out my back as Yubaluna's own bat-like limbs extended from her shoulders. Together, we lifted off the ground. Two. I held my free hand forward and unleashed a wall of hellfire. The wall separating Yubaluna and I from the outside turned to ash on contact, the wall moving a few meters past before sputtering out my command. Our way now unbarred. Yubaluna and I flew up into the air above the magically constructed facsimile of Kuo Academy. I had never been to or even seen the school, but the layout was simple enough. There were several white-walled buildings surrounded by dirt lots and well-trimmed grass. Some of the buildings were connected into T or L shapes, while others stood apart from the rest. "That's a lot of buildings," Yubaluna observed as we flew ever higher. "Maybe I'll be able to have some fun after all." "This is good," I said, stopping our ascent and extricating my arm from Yubaluna. "Target the buildings first, but if you see any of Rias's peerage, feel free to light them up. I'll cover you." Yubaluna gave an exaggerated curtsy. "As you command, my king." Straightening, Yubaluna took a deep breath. Then the air began to tremble, the sign of magic being channeled. Throwing her hands forward, two great, shining spell circles flared to life, and in front of them grew two oscillating spheres of black magic. With a twitch of her fingers, both spheres rapidly accelerated through the air, beelining straight towards the building closest to the one we believed Rias to have been transported to. The orbs connected with the building and detonated on impact. There was a brief moment of silence followed by a cacophonous, booming sound, as if a thunderstorm were roiling overhead. The building was torn from its foundation by the force of the two explosions, and what pieces of it remained intact were sent flying from the epicenter of the explosion. "5. Nice work," I said with a grin. "Keep it up." Without a word, Yubaluna summoned more spell circles. More and more of the explosive orbs rocketed away from her every moment. The buildings, the trees, the grass, the dirt. Nothing was safe from Yubaluna's power. Rias Grimoris Rook retired. Graphia's voice spoke throughout the arena once more, though this time, there was a trace of worry underlying the professionalism. "That was disappointingly fast," I said. I wanted to see how I measured up against her hand-to-hand skills. Belford always kicked my ass, and I wanted to win. "My king," Yubaluna said, her eyes narrowed. She pointed towards the building we suspected Rias to be in, and I followed her indication to a black-haired girl flying towards us at breakneck speed. "Keep hitting the ground until you find the knight, then take him out. The queen is mine." Leaving Yubaluna to continue her wanton destruction, I flew forward to meet Rias's queen. The queen snarled at me as she flew. "Bastard, you hurt Kaneko." Rearing her hand back, she thrust it forward and sent a bolt of vibrant blue lightning streaking towards me. It was very likely that such an attack wouldn't be able to outperform the phoenix flames of my immortality, but if she was allowed to hit me, her defeat wouldn't be humiliating. Morphing into my fire form, I controlled a gust of wind to propel me downward to one of my markers, easily dodging the lightning blast. Once there, I shifted back and turned to see Rias's queen staring slack-jawed at me. Not willing to waste such a perfect opening, I held my palm up towards her. A bright red magic circle flared into being before me, and a 2-inch diameter column of compressed flame rocketed upwards. The beam hit Rias's queen square in the chest, at which point I closed my fist. The entire length of the fiery beam exploded, heated flame rapidly rushing outwards and violently tearing through anything in its path. The flame that had connected to Rias's queen exploded and knocked her about like a doll held between the teeth of a hyperactive puppy. More and more flame surrounded her as I summoned even more hellfire, detonating everything in her vicinity, leaving her to helplessly flail, unable to control her flight. She'd been thrashed about for almost 30 seconds when she disappeared in a flash of blue. 3. Rias Gremory's queen retired. Graphia's voice spoke once again, and was that concern I heard in her voice? I was about to rejoin Ubeluna when I felt a section of the flames I'd summoned to dispatch Rias's queen part unnaturally behind me. My fire had become an extension of myself over the years. I could feel and control it at will, allowing me to feel when it was moved by a force that wasn't my own. The flame that spilled away from me when I'd exited my fire form had just been moved by a force I didn't control. Spinning around, I saw a blonde-haired kid leaping towards me with a long, black, spiked sword held over his head. Moving quickly, I sped towards the knight to close into a gap where his large sword would be ineffective and simultaneously summoned a flaming dagger into my hand. I closed the distance and shoved the dagger up into the knight's ribs, his sword arm swinging harmlessly over my left shoulder. The knight exhaled sharply as I stabbed him and grasped at the wound, but I'd created a second dagger and already pulled the first free. I began to repeatedly stab into his chest and stomach and was not surprised when his body was quickly covered in a bright blue light. 6. Rias Gremory's knight retired. Yes, that was definitely concern I heard in Graphia's voice. I heard a disappointed hum and turned to see Ubeluna frowning at the space the knight had just disappeared from. He was supposed to be mine, she said, disappointed. Sorry, Yub. He didn't leave me much choice. I'll make it up to you, though. You can have the first go at Rias. I won't interfere. Ubeluna's eyes lit up, but she quickly frowned again. But, my king, part of the reason for this raiding game was to prove your strength. I cannot take the final confrontation from you. I shrugged. I defeated Rias's queen in less than a minute with no injury to myself and beat her knight with blades. I'd say I've sufficiently proven myself. You can take Rias herself. 6. Ubeluna smiled and opened her mouth to say something when we were both buffeted by a great wind. We looked towards the source of the hurricane and saw Rias. Her crimson hair was faintly glowing a blood red and standing on its ends. The space around her warped at unnatural angles as she seethed, furious at our very existence. 1. You hurt my peerage. You hurt my family. You want to parade me around as your trophy wife? I won't let you. 6. Not at all intimidated by the display, I turned to Ubeluna and said, She's all yours, Yub. I spun around, showing Rias my back, and shoved my hands in my pockets as I made my way over to the remnants of a tree that had been obliterated by Ubeluna's initial bombardment. Don't you dare. 1. Whatever Rias had been about to scream at me was cut off by an explosion louder than any that had come before. Intrigued, I turned around, and my jaw nearly fell open at the sight before me. Ubeluna had taken to the sky and now hovered almost 10 feet above Rias and was staring down at the Gremory heiress. The features of her face strained in fury. Black, unchained magic flowed around her entire body. Her eyes were hidden behind a glow darker than an opal's core as she glared down at Rias. I was nothing, Ubeluna said, her voice taking on an otherworldly echo as she slowly closed the distance to Rias. I was born to be a slave. I was going to be a slave. My parents tried to keep the truth from me, but I was smart enough to know what would happen. The bastard who owned their debt stank of lust every time he looked at me. I would have been his toy. On her final word, an explosion tore out from Ubeluna, blowing Rias back through the air and forcing me to brace on the ground, lest I be knocked away too. Where the hell did this power come from? You were born with everything, Rias Gremory. Wealth, servants, a castle to call home. Even your blood is filled with the power to destroy. But you didn't earn a scrap of it. Yub brought her hand up, and a massive spell circle appeared before her. Rather than an orb like before, this time a cone of pure, explosive devastation exploded out from Ubeluna's hand. Rias hastily created a shield, but even though she escaped the full force of the blast, she was pushed even further back. So far back that she hit the ground and had to roll back to her feet. Ubeluna's face was dispassionate as she advanced towards Rias. When we met in the restaurant, I discovered something. Did you know that anger and wrath are two different emotions? I'd always thought I was a greed devil, but I learned my true sin at that moment. Wrath. Another cone of devastation blasted forth from Euboluna's outstretched hands, but Rias was ready this time. The Grimory heiress dodged the blast and screamed out in exertion as a wave of pure destruction rushed towards Euboluna. A spell circle appeared beneath Euboluna's right foot, and she kicked downwards. An explosion erupted beneath her foot, sending her flying higher into the air and out of the path of Rias's attack. You were born with everything. Euboluana seethed, her voice dripping venom. And you're going to take the one thing I had. The one who saved me. The one who remade me. Who gave me a future. The one who saw me. Euboluana threw her arms wide, and a massive spell circle rose in front of her, large enough to encompass her entire body. Then you had the gall to reject him, to scorn him, to hurt him. There was a great rushing sound, as if a great wave was about to crash into the coastline. Then nothing. Absolute silence. Silence akin to what I'd imagined the vacuum of space was like. Silence that was broken by 7 words. I'm gonna fucking annihilate you, bitch. 12. A great booming sound like 10,000 cannons firing in unison erupted from Euboluana. Pouring out of the glyph before her was a tidal wave of death, a cone of blinding white light vaporizing all it touched. The rubble from destroyed buildings and shattered trees just disappeared, consumed by Euboluana's power. 1. The only thing that didn't immediately succumb to her fury was the object of her rage. Whether by luck or skill, Rias had erected a barrier from the power of destruction a bare instant before Euboluana's attack that was annihilating Euboluana's assault before it could reach Rias. Rias stood as one break in a river, Moses parting the sea. Her forehead was creased in concentration, and sweat poured down her face as her arms shook, straining to maintain her shield. With a growl of rage, Rias shouted, "I retire!" The Grimory heiress was engulfed in a blue light and pulled out of the path of Euboluana's wrath. Rias Grimory has retired. Riser Phoenix is the victor. I paid no mind to Graphia's declaration. I was too busy running towards where Euboluana had collapsed. She'd forced too much power into her final attack and fell over when the cost caught up with her. I fell to my knees and checked her over, letting out a sigh of relief when I saw she was not only breathing but conscious. She was laying on her back, trying to get her breath back. She turned to look up at me and said, Did I get her?" I smiled, nodding as I said, "She retired. You won." Euboluana smiled tiredly. "Good. I'm sorry, my king." "Sorry for what?" "You won." I asked, overcome with confusion. "I'll never have the courage to do this again." Euboluana reached up and grabbed the back of my neck, pulling herself up towards me while she pulled me down to meet her halfway. She pressed her lips against mine. 1. I didn't fight it. Instead, I deepened the kiss. I didn't think Euboluana felt this way about me, but the past 10 minutes went a long way to convincing me. Euboluana pulled back, a content smile on her face. "I really want to do that again, but you need to make your declaration before we're pulled out of the arena and away from the cameras." My eyes widened as I realized my window was closing. When we'd first started planning this, we knew we'd need to make the most of this opportunity. Carefully withdrawing myself from Euboluana, doing everything I could to not cause the exhausted young woman any more discomfort, I stood and faced the barrier, hoping there was a camera in this direction. As per the contract signed by Lords Phoenix and Grimory and Ladies Phoenix and Grimory, control of the betrothal now falls to me. I hereby dissolve the betrothal contract between myself and Rias Grimory. May her future husband treat her as she has treated me. The moment the last word left my mouth, I was engulfed in a blue light and found myself in the waiting room once more. A quick search of my surroundings found Euboluana stubbornly climbing to her feet, wincing with each movement. 1. "Eub, wait." I rushed over to her and pulled a file from my belt. Euboluana shook her head, saying, "No, my king. I will be fine. There's no need for—" "Hush." I cut her off as I uncorked the file, carefully pouring it out onto Euboluana's stomach. The Phoenix tear flashed white as it made contact with Euboluana's skin, and the minor abrasions and cuts visible on her body rapidly healed. Euboluana's panting breathing evened out as the tear did its work. "Thank you, Riser." You didn't need a waste. It wasn't a waste. I killed that train of thought immediately. Now, as much as I'd like to go over everything that just happened, I have a feeling that we're about to be... Oh, brother. A far too cheerful voice called out as the door to the waiting room opened. Sighing, I turned and saw Ruvel strutting into the room with a grin wider than a Cheshire cat's plastered to his face. You know, little brother, Ruvel began as he sauntered his way over to me. If you had told me you didn't want Rias because you were already spoken for, I would have been more than happy to introduce you to the novel concept of a harem. You're a phoenix after all. Only the best for you. Why? I would have even been willing to show you how I conduct my own harem. You could have taken notes, looked at diagrams, even... Ruvel, please. That's enough, I said, doing my best not to cringe. This was not a conversation I ever wanted to have with my brother. What did mother and father say when I won? Ruvel's smile dimmed somewhat. They were conflicted. You did well, Riser, but the way you handled things is going to cause problems. What do you mean? What did I do wrong? Ruvel sighed, running his hand through his hair as he tried to organize his thoughts. You won. Soundly. That's good for a lot of reasons. The way you broke off the contract is going to piss a lot of people off, though. You just publicly humiliated the Gremory family. Now I was just plain confused. That was kind of the idea. You know, like how they humiliated me and our family. It's not that simple. Rias's stunt made a fool of you in front of the lower caste. You just slighted the Gremory family in front of the lower caste and the pillars. Where mother, father, and I are going to have to run damage control for a while. I'm not sure exactly what that will entail, but don't let it bother you. You did good, Riser. You're 1-0 in the rating game scene now. Give it a few hundred years, and you might even be able to lose to me. 1. I raised an eyebrow. Don't you mean beat you? Ruvel snorted. Not on your life. You'll get stronger, sure, but no matter how high you rise, I'll be waiting in the wings to kick your ass. Grinning at the implied challenge, I said, we'll see. Ruvel pulled me into a side hug and led me back over to Ubeluna. Come on, you two, he said. I'm sure you have lots of celebrating to get to back at the manor. We'll throw a victory party later. Ubeluna's face went bright red, and she looked away shyly, but she didn't deny anything, a fact that excited me to no end. A teleportation circle expanded out from Ruvel to encompass all three of us, and moments later we were back in the main hall of the Phoenix Manor. Mother, father, Raykal, and a visibly shaking Ravel were already there. Ravel was facing Mother, and was seemingly in the middle of screaming at her. What you did? I never got a chance to learn from her, Mother. Always. You're too young, Ravel. When you're older, Ravel. Why would you trade her? Mother turned from Ravel when she noticed us arrive and, looking directly at me, said, Ask your brother. I wasn't sure what was happening, but I had a very bad feeling. Father looked disappointed in me. Rakel looked like his usual unpleasant self, and Mother looked downright vindictive. Something was very wrong. What happened? I said to no one in particular, just wanted to learn what was going on. Ravel pointed at Mother and opened her mouth, but Mother spoke over her, her eyes still locked on mine. I fixed a problem you created with your immaturity, Riser. Perhaps this lesson will finally get through to you where others did not. What lesson? I asked, my panic growing by the second. Ruvel's mouth fell open disbelievingly. Mother, surely you didn't? Mother just smiled at him. Ruvel, what's happening? I said, asking the one person who I thought would actually give me an answer. When I left to get you, Lord Gremory entered our box. He was saying that you slighted his daughter and shamed her by not fighting her yourself. He demanded we give him the bishop that trained your queen. The world around me faded away. Time seemed to slow down. The only thing I was able to focus on at that moment was my mother's smug grin. You didn't, I said, refusing to believe she'd do something like that. Clarissa had forgotten who held her leash. I have no use for such a rebellious bishop. She was grinning as she said, now all I need to do is pawn that queen of yours off to the lowest bidder. She's been a corrupting influence that needs to go. 4. Ever since I'd been reborn into this world, into this body, I'd struggled with the fact that I had new parents. The parents I had when I was a human were fantastic. They taught me right from wrong and sacrificed more than I was able to understand for a long time to keep me happy. When they died, it hurt, but I moved on. In this life, my parents had seemed great. They were happy to have me and went out of their way to keep me safe. Then they finally let me start experimenting with my power, and they both stopped conversing with me. I would only see them at dinner times, and even then, I only really talked to Ruvel and Ravel. Even Raquel had grown apart from me. When I brought Eubeluna home, I was met with disdain and borderline disgust, but I hadn't cared. I didn't think it would turn into anything serious. I thought they still cared about me, that they saw me as a son and not as a tool. But in that moment, looking at my mother's vengeful smirk as she drank in my shock and pain, watching my father's disappointed eyes stare indifferently at my pain, I realized the truth. They stopped caring about me a while ago, if they ever did in the first place. No parent would draw such sadistic pleasure from their child's suffering. You are no longer my parents. My words shocked the room into silence. Ravel ceased her screaming, Ruvel's protest died on his lips, and Raquel stopped yawning to actually listen for once. "What did you just say?" Lady Phoenix asked, her eyes narrowing as she took a threatening step forward, something I hadn't noticed she did before, but now was remembering several independent instances of. "You are no longer my parents." Turning away from them, I faced Eubeluna. "If you want to, I go where you go." She interrupted me, determination laced in her voice. I nodded once and engulfed the two of us in a teleportation circle. "Now listen here, you little—" Whatever Lady Phoenix was about to say was cut off by my teleportation. The main hall of the Phoenix Mansion had been exchanged for a wrought iron fence. "Where are we?" Eubeluna asked. "The den of our enemies." I walked forward and knocked on the fence, knowing the wards placed on it would alert someone that I was there. A few moments passed, then a guard walked up to the other side of the gate. "State your business." "I'm here to retrieve something from Lord Gremory. I am willing to pay for its return." The guard studied me for a moment before the gate opened. "Follow me," he said, walking towards a manor in the distance. We walked on in silence, down a gravel path, lined on either side by flowers of various shapes and colors. The great mansion in the distance steadily grew closer until we were right up to its tall doors. The doors were opened, and the guard led us into a large hall not too dissimilar to the one in the Phoenix Mansion. Standing at the top of a set of stairs waiting for us, a smug grin on his face, was the red-haired form of Lord Gremory. "Riser Phoenix, I must say it is a surprise to see you here. Clarissa, what do you want in exchange for her?" "The witch? Why, she's a valuable piece, but I suppose I'd be willing to trade her if you were willing to publicly apologize for hunting my Rias, and state that you were the aggressor, attacking her unjustly." I wasn't aware that the Gremory house made a habit of lying. I'll have to pass that along to anyone who will care to listen. Lord Gremory laughed. "I understand your position was not ideal, boy. But you hurt my daughter, so I'll tell you what. I heard you have a mutation bishop among your evil pieces. Give me that bishop so I can give it to my daughter, and you can have the witch." "Done." The word was out of my mouth immediately. A real devil would never make that trade. Clarissa just wasn't valuable enough. She hadn't proven herself in raiding games or combat in any way that would increase her value. Most of her time was spent either training me or in her lab, so her true strength was unknown. Even so, a mutation bishop was worth far more than her, but I cared about loyalty more than perceived value. If a magical glow rock was what it took to free my mentor, there was no question of whether or not I'd make the trade. "Riser, wait!" A voice called from behind Lord Gremory as Clarissa emerged behind him. "Do not do. The deal is already made, witch." Refocusing on me, Lord Gremory said, "I trade you my bishop for your mutation bishop." Pulling my mutation bishop to me from its place, wherever it went when it wasn't with me, I said, "I trade my mutation bishop for Clarissa." Immediately, I felt the change. The mutation bishop in my hand was no longer mine, while simultaneously, Clarissa was now connected to me in the same way Eubeluna was. Lord Gremory held his hand out palm up, and the mutation bishop that moments ago rested in my hand appeared in his. "It was a pleasure doing business with you, Riser. And for the record, there really are no hard feelings. You made the most of a bad situation. My daughter needed to be humbled, and I have failed in humbling her where I believe you have just succeeded. You screwed a few things up, but you're young. I hope we can grow to be friends in the future." With those parting words, Lord Gremory turned around and walked deeper into his manor. 11. "Clarissa, let's go," I said, wanting desperately to be anywhere else. The witch who had taught me for close to a decade scowled, but hurried over to me. Once she was close enough, I teleported myself, Clarissa, and Ubeluna away from Gremory Manor to a side street Ubeluna, and I would come to sometimes. That was foolish. So foolish, I do not have the words to describe it. Clarissa said, frowning down at me disapprovingly. "You lost your mutation, Bishop, retrieving a third-rate bishop that has not." She stopped talking when I hugged her. I didn't retrieve a third-rate bishop. I got my friend back. There's no price I wouldn't pay for my friends, and unlike my egg donor, I won't ever trade you unless you want me to. Looking to my right to where Ubelina stood watching the exchange, I added, "Either of you." 1. How could a devil grow to be so foolish? Clarissa said. I pretended not to notice when she returned the hug, holding me tight with shaking arms. I pretended not to notice when the tears began to fall. I had no idea what I was going to do now, but the three of us would figure it out. With Ravel Phoenix. Ravel was reeling. The world seemed to have turned on its head, and she couldn't tell which direction was up anymore. Riser was gone. They'd searched everywhere, but no one had been able to find him. Her mother's rash decision to trade away Clarissa, a decision that irritated Ravel, because now she would never be able to learn from the century-old witch, though her feelings for Clarissa's fate were vastly overshadowed by the concern she felt for her brother, had ended horribly. Riser left in a rage, taking his queen with him. Ruvel had disappeared shortly afterwards, heading into the city to search the few areas Riser ever visited during his rare excursions into the outside world, hoping to turn up anything that might help him locate their lost brother. Both Riser and Ruvel had been gone for 2 days. An illogical part of Ravel's mind couldn't help but think part of this fiasco was her fault. She wasn't much younger than Riser, and ever since she was born her parents had doted on her constantly. She always felt a smug amusement when her mother would read her stories late into the night, indulging her love of attention. She hadn't thought Riser was affected. All the youngest of her brothers ever seemed to care about was training. She'd heard the rumors that circulated among the servants, that Riser spent all of his time locked behind doors with his queen. What else would a young, hormonal pillar devil who had everything be doing but having never-ending sex with his abundantly beautiful queen? Ravel knew that wasn't the case, and she thought everyone else did too. Her brother loved to train. Ubeluna was with him because she trained with Riser. Ubeluna's growing affection for her brother had been clear to Ravel for some time, but romance was the furthest thing from Riser's mind. He was too focused on finding new and exciting ways to use the Phoenix family's magic. Why was that fact in question? Her brother was a strength nut, not a horn dog. She didn't think everyone was really so out of touch with Riser's interest to think he'd be so base. 2. Now, watching as her mother and father prepared to receive Lord Gremory, she couldn't help but think maybe she should have said something. Maybe she should have sacrificed one of the nights spent with her mother so that Riser could be with their parents too. Maybe instead of chuckling at the absurdity of the rumors, she should have put a stop to them. I should have traded that which half a century ago. Ravel's mother said, her voice a hiss of fury. Where does she get off raising my son in my place? My boy would never have disrespected me like that without her poisonous words whispering in his ear. Raykal let out a dramatic sigh as he lazily straightened out his jacket. Riser is just trying to garner attention. Leave him be, and he'll be back when he gets hungry. You know as well as I do that he's too lazy to keep this up for long. He is not lazy, Ravel shouted as she stormed to her feet, tears gathering in her eyes. He's your brother. How do you know so little about him that you think he's lazy? Raykal smirked at her over his shoulder as he popped up the collars of his jacket. I understand you are a little young to understand this, Ravel, but not you too, Ravel said, her voice cracking as the tears began to fall. How did Riser's brother buy into that asinine bullshit? Did Raykal really know that little about Riser? If he was that out of touch with Riser, what did he think about her? Ravel, what's wrong, my little hellion? Her mother said as she bent down, holding her arms wide to hug Ravel. Ravel threw herself back out of her mother's reach, glaring hatefully at her parents and her older brother. "This is all your fault." Before anything else could be said, a bright red flash of light illuminated the courtyard in front of Phoenix Castle. Their guests had arrived. "If we're interrupting, we can come back later," Lord Gremory said, his keen eyes scanning over the assembled faces of the 4 present members of the Phoenix family. "Not at all," Ravel's father said, stepping in front of the rest of his family, giving them a chance to compose themselves as he held his hand out to shake Lord Gremory's hand. "Thank you for coming. I hope we are able to come to an agreement that satisfies the interests of both of our pillars." Ravel turned her back to the Lord and Lady Gremory as she wiped at her eyes, trying to hold even more tears back from falling. Her brother was missing, and her family thought now was the time to play politics. "I must admit," Lord Gremory said with an easy smile as he shook Lord Phoenix's hand, "I was surprised to hear from you so soon after Riser's visit. I certainly hope he hasn't come to regret our transaction." Ravel whipped her head around to face Lord Gremory. Her mother and father's eyes narrowed at Lord Gremory's words, but Raquel just seemed amused. Chuckling, Raquel said, "Did my brother come to beg for the contract to be reinstated? I knew he'd regret his actions once he was finally able to comprehend the true scope of what he'd lost." Lord Gremory's eyebrow rose, his expression turning thoughtful as he said, "You weren't aware of his visit? What did that stupid boy do now?" Ravel's mother said, her shoulders sagging as she sighed in exasperation. "My apologies," Lord Gremory said, a knowing smile spreading across his face. "I thought you had sent him to recover the witch as a means of smoothing things over between our 2 pillars." "He did what?" Heat waves began to radiate off of Ravel's mother as her gaze locked onto Lord Gremory. Seemingly loving the spectacle before him, Lord Gremory held his hand up with a dramatic flourish, a mutation bishop appearing atop his palm. "Riser traded me his mutation bishop for your former bishop. Am I to assume this was not done on your orders?" "No," Lady Phoenix practically growled. "Where is he?" "I can honestly say I do not know," Lord Gremory said, the bishop in his hand disappearing as he closed his fist around it. "I had thought the mutation bishop was a gift to reunite our families. I was wrong. We will be leaving." He held his arm out to his wife. The woman took his arm, glaring at Lord and Lady Phoenix in disgust. "Wait," Lord Phoenix said, stepping forward as a teleportation circle expanded out from Lord and Lady Gremory. "Should your son return here, please tell him I would like to speak with him," Lord Gremory said as his teleportation spell was being cast. "That young man has a lot of potential. It appears the rumors could not have been more wrong. Good day, Phoenixes. Do not set foot on my family's lands again. I refuse to deal with those who turn on their own." The Lord and Lady Gremory vanished in a flash of vibrant red light. 5. Ravel stared uncomprehendingly at the space Lord and Lady Gremory had teleported from, 1,000 thoughts swimming through her head. Her brother had recovered Clarissa? But why hadn't he come home yet if that was the reason he left? "Fine," Lady Phoenix said, drawing Ravel's attention and that of Lord Phoenix and Raquel. Lady Phoenix straightened her back, folding her hands in front of her elegant red dress. She turned to face Lord Phoenix and said, "Riser has declared he is not our child. I believe it is time we make that official." "No," Ravel shrieked, running towards her mother in a rage. "You can't." Her mother had just suggested banishing Riser, stealing his last name, and barring him from ever coming home. Surely she wasn't serious? Ravel hadn't heard of something so serious happening to a pillar devil in ever. He made his choice when he decided to trade away the Phoenix family's only mutation piece for a worthless whore. Lady Phoenix said coldly, her eyes dispassionate. Lord Bale had shown a keen interest in that bishop. Without it, we have lost a great bargaining chip. If Riser wants to consort with low-class girls and hags, then his status should reflect his decision. 2. Lord Phoenix's eyes were hard as he nodded to his wife. "We will make the announcement tonight." "No," Ravel cried. "This is his home. Where will he go if he can't?" "That is no longer your concern, my hellion," Lady Phoenix said as she took her husband's arm and began to walk away. Riser is no longer your brother. Ravel was having trouble breathing. She felt as if the very air was crushing down on her. This couldn't really be happening, could it? Cheer up, little sister, Raquel said as he sauntered towards her, an amused grin on his face. At least now we... Ravel stopped listening to him as she ran. She dashed through the halls, darting around servants as tears fell from her eyes. She tore open the door to her room and slammed it shut behind her. Falling on her bed, she curled into a ball and began to sob. Her parents had disowned her brother. There were times when Ravel had grown annoyed at her brother's obsessive drive to train, but she'd always loved him. He snuck her cookies from the kitchen when Mother sent her to her room for misbehaving. He showed her how to turn her fire into explosions. He had even humored her and had a tea party with her and her dolls once. How could Riser be anything other than a phoenix? What would happen to him now? Without the phoenix name to shield him, Riser was in grave danger. Devils would come after him for his bloodline. They'd try to force their peerage pieces on him or kidnap him to study his clan traits. Someone might even try to trap him and force him to produce phoenix tears. 2. Riser was no longer a phoenix, lost who knows where in the underworld, and Ruvel hadn't checked in since he'd left. 2 of Ravel's siblings were gone, leaving her alone with a sociopathic layabout and a mother and father who were willing to disown their son over something as stupid as a magical rock. Ravel had never felt so alone. 2. I am so sorry, little brother, Ruvel said from across from me. We were sitting in a hotel room he had paid for a month in advance out of his own, rather vast, personal wealth. His normally well-kept hair sagged down his face. His clothes were ruffled and out of place, and there were bags under his eyes. It was clear he hadn't been taking things well. I did everything I could, but short of giving my position as heir to Raquel, there isn't much I can. Don't do that, I interrupted him. I know none of this was your fault or your idea. Don't give that smug prick your place. My gaze turned from him to the newspaper I was holding, and I couldn't help but sigh again. In large, bolded letters, the headline read, Riser of Phoenix no longer. The article went on to speculate as to why I had been disowned and banished from my household. I couldn't stomach reading any more than the first few sentences. 1. Throwing the paper onto the coffee table next to the bed, I turned back to Ruvel. How's Ravel? Raquel may have been a jerk, but Ravel always liked me. At least I thought she did. Rubbing tiredly at his eyes, Ruvel said, She's taking it really hard. She won't talk to mother or father and keeps to her room unless I'm home. Both of us have been forbidden from speaking to you. Then why are you talking to me? I asked. The last thing I wanted was for Ruvel to get caught up in my problems. A tired grin broke out across his features. What do you mean? I'm with Zissa training my peerage right now, a fact which she will vouch for. I smiled back at my brother. I hadn't spent nearly as much time with Ruvel's peerage as I had with him, but from what few interactions I'd had with them before and after Ruvel's rating game matches, Zissa, Ruvel's queen and the third daughter of the Shack's pillar, was kind and loyal to my brother. She was actually one of the main reasons I chose Ubeluna as my queen. I'd much rather have a queen stand beside me through any foe than have the strongest piece possible. Not that Ubeluna hadn't just shown she was incredibly powerful. She defeated the Grimoire heiress by herself, a fact that didn't go unnoticed if the pile of ashes in the corner of the room was anything to go by. Well wishes and condolences mailed from various lords trying to take advantage of my no longer being a phoenix by offering vast sums in exchange for my queen piece. Their current ashen state showed exactly where I thought they could shove their offers. I wasn't trading Ubeluna. Do you have any idea what I should do now? I asked Ruvel, desperate for anything to direct my attention towards. I've been scrambling since we left the Grimoire estate. The extent of my plan was to free Clarissa, which I'd done, but now I was more lost than a whale beached in a desert. 4. Make friends, Ruvel said, his features and voice dead serious. No matter what happens, you will always be my brother. And I swear to you, once I am the head of the Phoenix family, your name will be restored, but until then, you need to gather as many allies as you possibly can. Every opportunistic lord and lady will smell blood in the water and come after you. Some will likely offer to protect you by giving you a place in their peerage. Do not accept any such offer. I second that advice, my king. Clarissa, speaking up for the first time, said from where she and Eublina stood sentinel by the door. I sighed and fell back onto the bed. Make friends, huh? I trusted Ruvel's assessment, and my plans for the future had been so thoroughly dashed that most of them were pipe dreams now. Still, I knew a lot about this world from the fanfiction days of my first life. I'd been planning on abusing that knowledge to my own benefit, but I'd lost almost all of the power I had to take advantage of certain things. One thing in particular stood out. The person I had planned to use my queen on before coming across Eublina, then earmark my mutation bishop for. Seeing as I no longer possessed a mutation bishop, and I knew of someone else who would kill for the person in question, I had an opportunity. Clarissa, I said, still staring up at the ceiling, would you do me a favor and brew up the most potent restorative draft you can? Add in stuff designed to wake people up too. Please. Throw in a phoenix tear while you're at it. I put the 3 I carry with me in the dresser. Why was I securing some of the most highly sought after healing concoctions in the world in a dresser? Because there wasn't a shoebox in my hotel of banishment. 1. I heard Clarissa walk towards Ruvel and the sound of something being exchanged between them. Ruvel had brought a comically large duffel bag filled with everything important he could find in Clarissa's old lab before Lady Phoenix tore through and burned it to purify the room. I will, of course, do as you ask, my king. But may I ask what you are planning? I want to know that too. I looked up and saw Ruvel shooting me a calculating look. You have a plan, don't you, little brother? Sitting back up, I shrugged. One that will either solve all of my current problems or blow up in my face spectacularly. There's no way to know unless I give a shot. Given I don't have a better idea, I'm going to take the gamble. Perhaps if you were to share this oh-so-risky plan with your wise and intelligent older brother, he'd be able to help you sort through the kinks? Ruvel said, a playful glint flashing through his serious gaze. 1. Well, I'm going to walk right up to Seraphal Leviathan's office and offer to banish any doubt that resides in certain devils' minds about whether or not she is actually powerful enough to be Leviathan's heir. 1. A disbelieving silence followed in the wake of my absurd statement. Ruvel was the one to break it. Riser, it's a good thing I love you, because you have a habit of making me question the fundamental principles of reality. X. My king, I must once again request you consider what you are about to do, Clarissa said, her eyes darting around anxiously as the 3 of us walked up to the massive, opulent building before us. I have, Clarissa. I screwed up with Lady Phoenix, and the 2 of you got dragged along to suffer the consequences. I'm risking this for you as much as I am for me. Clarissa and I will be content so long as we stay at your side, my king. I suggest we heed your brother's suggestion and prepare. Eublina said, even more tense and anxious than Clarissa. If we wait, there'll be more of an opening for people to take advantage of us. I don't want to give them the opportunity to. I don't even want to think about the 1,000 things they could do to us. We need to do this now, or not at all. I'm in the news right now. That is the only thing that might get me an audience. Pulling the door open, I led Eublina and Clarissa into the building. What awaited us was a modestly decorated waiting room. There were several fake fern plants lining the walls with simple, cushioned chairs between them. Before us was a desk and a blue-haired devil woman attending to a stack of paperwork before her. She looked us over as we entered and said, "Is there something I can help you with?" Taking the lead, I approached her and said, "My name is Riser Fee. My name is Riser, and I am here to request an audience with Seraphal Leviathan." Raising an eyebrow at me, the woman said, "Lady Leviathan is busy on the best of days. I doubt I'll be able to find an opening. What is the purpose of the meeting? I'm hoping to make a deal with her." The blue-haired woman shot me a humorous look, then typed something into her desk's computer. "I've inputted your request. The standard waiting time for a response is anywhere from 2 weeks to—" An alert sound from her computer interrupted her. She looked back at the monitor and her eyes widened slightly. Turning back to me, she said, "Lady Leviathan has the next half hour free and is willing to see you. For security reasons, I can only allow you to see her. Your peerage must wait here." I looked between Eubeluna and Clarissa before looking back at the attendant. Security reasons? I doubted there was anything the three of us could do to threaten a Satan. She shrugged. You'd be surprised the stupid schemes some people dream up and are actually willing to try. Just you, or you can turn around and leave. I turned back to Clarissa and Eubeluna. I'll be all right. Just take a seat and wait. I'll be back before too long. Neither of them looked happy with the arrangement, but they didn't say anything in front of the lady behind the desk. They sat down next to each other on two of the chairs in the otherwise empty lobby. The devil behind the desk nodded to her right. Take the elevator to the top floor. It's impossible to get lost. She turned her attention back to the stack of paperwork in front of her. I walked over to the elevator and stepped inside when it opened automatically for me. I pushed the button for the highest floor and the door closed. I felt the elevator carry me rapidly upwards. Closing my eyes, I took a deep breath. This was it. I could probably solve all of my problems for the foreseeable future if I handled this well. Or I could offend one of the single most powerful figures in devil society and condemn myself and my peerage to a very torturous, very short existence. There was a shrill ding, and the elevator door slid open. The elevator didn't open to a hallway like I expected. Instead, the door opened directly into a large office. A central desk sat atop vinyl flooring. 3 comfortable-looking chairs sat in front of the desk, facing it. Pictures, awards, and paintings hung on the dark blue walls. A large window was set behind the desk looking out over the city beyond. Sitting in a large chair behind the desk was a woman. She had long black hair that disappeared behind the desk and wore a simple business suit. Her eyes were searching me, bellying her intrigue as I stepped into her office. I have to say, I never expected to meet you, Mr. Former Phoenix. I certainly didn't expect you to literally walk in my office. I have a lot of stuff I'm putting off for this, so be concise. My curiosity will only buy you so much of my time. Deciding to do as she said and get down to the point, I stepped forward and offered her a shallow bow. Lady Leviathan, I am here to bargain for lodging and several other concessions for myself and my peerage. Seraphal Leviathan's eyebrow rose, and her shoulders slumped in disappointment. If you're here looking for a place in my peerage, you can leave now. You might think you're impressive, but your magnitude's too weak for me to even consider. Raising my head back up, I said, That wasn't my intent, Lady Leviathan. I am not offering myself for your peerage, but I know of an individual you would certainly be interested in. She pursed her lips, as if deciding whether to humor me or throw me out. And who is this mystery person? Her name is Ingvild Leviathan. She is a half-devil descendant of the original Leviathan who is in possession of the as-yet undiscovered Longinus sacred gear Nereid Kyrie. 1. Seraphal Leviathan's amused. Casual demeanor shifted immediately. She became guarded and narrowed her eyes at me. There is no such person. Forcing myself to calmly take a breath under the gaze of a woman who could probably kill me faster than I was able to think, I said, What I'm about to say is going to sound unbelievable, but I ask that you please at least listen to the end. Speak, she said with little hesitation, her eyes still locked on me. For a long time, I had visions. I saw various events in the world. Some in the past, some in the present, some in the future. The past and present were fairly constant, but my visions of the future were almost always different. Sometimes peace would reign. Sometimes a second Great War would break out. And other times a beast I was literally unable to comprehend ate everything. I haven't seen anything in a long time, but those visions helped me mature faster and progress far further than I should have by my age. Throughout my visions, no matter what variation it was, some things remain constant. The current location of Ingvild Leviathan is one of those constants. I took a breath I didn't realize I needed as I hurriedly finished, stopping to take in her reaction. 1. This was my gamble. As I'd told Rivel, Eubeluna, and Clarissa back in the hotel, I had visions of various people and events transpiring throughout the world that I recalled which would grant me certain advantages in the future, such as Ingvild Leviathan's current predicament. Technically, I hadn't said a single lie. My visions were just glimpsed through fanfiction. I hadn't had any in a while because I'd actually been living in this world. I had no other way to explain my knowledge, so I went with the truth. A certain, slightly more believable version of it anyway. I couldn't decipher her feelings behind her mask of cool indifference, but the marked silence spoke volumes. Almost a full minute passed before she finally responded. That's a neat story, but you have no way to prove it. More importantly, it is rather suspicious that you wouldn't have made use of this knowledge yourself if you truly possessed it. I planned to, I said, try to ignore the feeling that the temperature was dropping. It was probably my nerves making me think that. At least that's what I hoped. I was going to use my mutation bishop on her when I was finally ready to fight through the guards the Old Satan faction placed around her. Old Satan faction, she said, her eyes narrowing further. I nodded. She is currently under the effect of the sleeping sickness. The Old Satan faction had her transported to the underworld to take advantage of our resources to try to resuscitate her. I have had a plan to wake her up for a while, but even my current peerage would probably be insufficient to fight through any guards they would place around her. She's far too valuable to them. Your visions, I could hear the skepticism dripping from that word. Didn't tell you who would be guarding her? 1. I shook my head. Like I said, I can't be sure which one was accurate. Sometimes it was a woman with silver hair. Other times it was a man with the body of a tank. All I know for sure is where they're keeping her. And where is that? Swallowing a lump in my throat, I opened my mouth and started the hardest part of this conversation. Before I tell you that, I'm going to tell you what I want in exchange for this information. The Leviathan raised an eyebrow at me, her ice-cold demeanor finally cracking. Do you really think you're in a position to make demands after everything you've just said? This is all I have left to make sure my peerage and I have a future. Feel free to torture me if you want, but whether I still have a last name or not, I possess the Phoenix powers of regeneration. Pain is an old friend. 1. She blinked at me, then tilted her head in confusion. Do you seriously think I would torture out of you? You must not really have had visions after all. Otherwise you'd know that's more Ajuka's department. Not wavering, I met her gaze. I've seen different versions of you do a lot of things. I know you star in your own magical girl show, but you are capable of terrible things when it pertains to those you care about. In one future I saw, a man killed your sister and dash. The floor, froze beneath me, instantly chilling me to my core. I couldn't help but start shaking as the Leviathan suddenly appeared directly in front of me. Ooh, the word was growled, as if a savage beast had learned how to speak, but was still controlled by an all-encompassing need to devour. Seraphal's eyes had gone cold, emotionless as they stared at me from not even a foot away, her presence choking the air around me as her hair began to levitate away from her shoulders. My breath was visible in the air in front of me as the air temperature plummeted. My eyes wide and breathing erratic, I quickly spouted out, Kokabeel. He goes rogue from the Grigori and tries to start another war. He lures the church in Grigori to Kuo town and starts a fight. Sometimes Sona doesn't make it out alive. 2. As I stared into the frigid, uncaring gaze of the walking apocalypse, I realized my fate was out of my hands. As of this moment, my life was hers. I would only continue to exist if she allowed it. And if she desired my death, I would be dead before I knew I was being attacked. 1. What felt like an eternity, but was more than likely only a few moments, passed. I believe you, the Leviathan said, backing away from me and walking towards her desk. My knees wobbled, and I hastily moved over to a chair before my legs gave out underneath me. A terrified look at my surroundings showed that the ice that only moments ago coated the room had disappeared entirely, leaving the room exactly as it was when I first entered. So, Mr. Vision, what do you want in exchange for the location of this inviled girl? 1. I looked at her disbelievingly as her demeanor shifted once more, this time to an eager businesswoman. You're not going to torture me? I said in disbelief. After that display, I expected her to strap me to a table and call her Satan friends so they could take turns sifting through my brain matter. 2. She chuckled and said, I've done some screwed up shit and will have to again. It comes with the job, but I'm not a heartless bitch, especially when I find someone who might grow into a really good friend to have. So what do you want? 4. Swallowing my nerves, I forced my brain to focus on what Ruvel, Eubelina, Clarissa, and I had discussed as fair compensation in the hotel room. I want land with a steading on it. It doesn't have to be a manor, but I want my own territory. I want wards installed or improved on the grounds to acceptable pillar home standards. I want enough funds to outfit the home with amenities, a research lab, and a training hall. And I want your friendship. My friendship? You're putting a price on my friendship? She asked in good humor. A stark change from the cold-blooded murderer who stood in her shoes not 2 minutes ago. I'm practically gift-wrapping you a descendant of the original Satans. That alone would be enough to cover everything else I've already asked for. But that's not all she is. She also possesses a Longina's sacred gear. With both that and her ancestry, she is destined to be a top player. I'm also offering to wake her from the sleeping sickness for you. I've been planning on adding her to my peerage for a while, so I've worked out a way to wake her up. On top of all that, I'm offering to solidify your position as Lady Leviathan. You would know better than I do that there are those in the underworld that still question if you are really worthy of the role. Having Ingvild in your peerage, serving under you would render any argument they brought forward mute. In exchange, if someone tries to annihilate me in the future, all I ask is that you put up the slightest amount of resistance in my favor. She started chuckling. I'll give you this much, Riser. You've got some major balls walking into my office and just throwing this at me. Her smile vanished. In its place was a calculating stare. That being said, I don't quite trust you yet. I think you're telling the truth, but I have no way to know for sure. For all I know, the old Satan faction approach you with an offer to protect you in your peerage if you lure me into a trap. So this is how we're going to deal with this. I'm going to write up a contract that both of us are going to sign stating that I'll give you everything you've asked for after the Leviathan girl is delivered. Then, you and I are going to go find the girl, and you're going to wake her up. Your peerage is going to stay here as collateral in case you try anything. Do you accept these terms? I try not to show it, but I was ecstatic. Despite the minor existential scare I had a little while ago, this had gone so much better than I'd hoped. Deal. But I need to retrieve a vial from Clarissa before we go. The potion she made will help me wake up Ingvild. We'll grab it on our way out. Now come on. The Leviathan pointed forward, dramatically putting her opposite hand on her hip. Her business suit vanished, a pink, far too revealing magical girl outfit appearing in its place. The frilly skirt was cut so short it barely covered her hips, let alone anything lower. The top had an arch cut into it that practically bisected her breasts. And the only part of her that was actually covered were her feet and calves by two poofy, pink tube socks. We need to save the princess from the bad devils. She leapt forwards and smashed her way through the window in her office, falling from my view as she flew towards the ground. I stared after her in dumbfounded silence for a solid 10 seconds. Was that really the woman who had just terrified me beyond capacity for rational thought? What the hell was wrong with this world? This is the last place I would have thought to look? The magical girl beside me said seriously as she looked up at the building. I believe that was the point. I said, also looking up at the hospital in front of us. The sign read, Leviathan Preventive Symphonia. It was a hospital that Seraphal Leviathan had opened a few decades after becoming a Satan to try to help devils with, as yet incurable diseases, the sleeping sickness included. The old Satan faction had literally been holding Ingvild under Seraphal's nose this entire time. Do you know exactly where she is? The Leviathan asked, serious despite her ridiculous clothing. Not her exact location. All I know is she's hidden in a secret room. It could be underground or part of the standing structure. I figure you have a better chance of finding it. Just feel around with your magic for any points of massive power or distinct lack of power. It would stand to reason they have wards in place to hide her power. Otherwise, she would have been dashed. I found her. The Leviathan interrupted me, her eyes fixed on a window several stories up the building. There is a cubic shape of absolutely nothing in an otherwise overcrowded building. It's a small space, but a small space is easier to hide. She has to be there. Follow me. Rather than walk up to the door and use the stairs like a normal person, the Leviathan elected to fly straight up and crash through a window. By the time I'd realized what was happening and followed after her, she'd already broken into some poor, innocent bystander's room. What was she thinking? "Don't fear. The magical girl Levi Tan is here," she said, striking a pose as she stood on the windowless windowsill. I arrived behind her just in time to see a little devil girl with bright red hair. She couldn't have been older than 10, within 4 attached to her arm, shriek and point at Seraphol. "Mommy, look, it's Levi Tan," the little girl screamed, her little eyes wide as saucers. "That's right," Seraphol said, hopping down from the windowsill and saddling up to the girl conspiratorially. She looked around dramatically, then cupped her hand by the girl's ear, whispering something to her as she did. The little girl's eyes went even wider. She mimed zipping her lips shut and throwing away a key. Seraphol winked and shot her a thumbs up. "Come along, flaming chicken. We have evil to conquer and justice to dispense." The Leviathan pranced past the confused mother and bright-smiling little girl and out of the room. The little girl's head tilted in confusion as she looked up at me. "You're a flaming chicken?" Sighing and wondering when this had become my life, I said, "Apparently so." A fireball appeared in my hand, quickly shaping into a chicken at my will. Using the same trick I used to create the stone Ubeluna wore around her neck, I hardened my fire and tossed the literal flaming chicken to the little girl. "There you go, kid. Now everyone will know you met the flaming chicken." Turning to the even more confused mother, I said, "Believe me, I'm nearly as lost as you are. Have a good day, ma'am." I left the room with the happily dancing girl behind and followed Seraphol out into the hallway. I found the Satan with a much more serious expression on her face as she glared furiously at a very particular part of the wall. "1. Riser? Make sure none of them get past me or hurt the patients." Without another word, the Leviathan burst through the wall into what I assumed to be a secret room. Surprised shouts and muted screams echoed from the room moments after she entered. I watched the hole in the wall, waiting for any sign of movement. A tall, blonde woman flew through the hole at breakneck speed, her bat-like wings extended out behind her. Blood poured out of a gaping hole in her stomach, greatly hampering her movements, though she was still as fast as a striking cobra. An elegant, silver sword was clasped in her right hand as she fled Seraphol in a panic. She saw me, and her eyes widened. She brought up her empty hand and summoned a spell circle, firing a large spear of ice at me. I summoned my own spell circle and evaporated the icicle with hellfire before it was anywhere near me. Using the rapidly expanding cloud of water vapor as cover, I morphed into my flame form and closed the gap to the devil, using the fire I'd melted her ice with as a marker. I formed 2 flaming daggers in my hands as I rematerialized and jammed them both into the blinded woman's throat. She began to gag, then quickly fell over dead in my arms. Her sword fell from her limp grasp, but I caught it before it hit the ground. I gave a quick look and, deciding to check it out later, attached it to my back with a hardened chain of flame that I conjured. Sword secure, I carried the body with me through the hole in the wall into a small room and threw it to the ground, looking for any other opponents. I found only carnage. The remains of at least 8 devils were strewn about the floor with a potential 3 or 4 more pureed in the corner. There was no way to tell an exact number from the liquefied corpses. I had no idea how they were able to cram so many of themselves into this tiny space, but it really drove home just how important Ingvild was to whoever sent her here. Aside from the display of blood and gore, the only thing present in the room was a simple gurney suspiciously clean of any of Seraphol's victims' blood. A girl with light purple hair slept soundly in the gurney while a device attached to her wrist beeped periodically. Gently, almost lovingly, Seraphol brushed a strand of hair out of the girl's face with the back of her hand. "Looks like you were telling the truth, Riser. Now let's see if you can actually wake her up. Help me give her the potion," I said as I approached, pulling the yellow, glowing liquid Clarissa had brewed at my request. Seraphol and I gently sat the girl up and opened her mouth, tilting her head back so the elixir would flow down her throat. The girl unconsciously coughed a little as the liquid went down, but there were no other changes or negative changes. "Now what?" Seraphol asked, sounding more than a little concerned. "Now, I'd do something I haven't told anyone I can do yet. I offered Seraphol a hesitant grin and said, "Keep it a secret, please? I've been keeping this as close to the chest as possible because I really don't want anyone to know I've figured out how to share my immortality with others." Before Seraphol could react in any noticeable way other than her widened eyes, I walked to the head of the bed and placed my palms on either side of the slumbering girl's head. When I told Seraphol I'd been preparing to wake her up on my own, I'd been telling the truth. I really wanted Ingvild in my peerage, but the way things had worked out, it would never have happened without me either trading Ubeluna, something I would not do, or pissing a lot of people off. That didn't mean my preparations were useless, though. I'd practiced this particular trick using rats. A large number of them exploded as I was getting the hang of it, but I had enough control to not blow up Ingvild. At least I was pretty sure I had enough control. Some may ask why I didn't just use a Phoenix tear, but that wouldn't do it. Phoenix tears restored you to your physical prime, but as shown by the various attempts to wake people from the sleeping sickness with them in the past, whatever caused the disease wasn't something the tears considered wrong. Ergo, a more hands-on approach was necessary. Taking one last breath to center myself, I began. Fire poured out of my palms into Ingvild's ears. I poured more and more of the phoenix flames of my immortality into the girl, causing the space around me to rapidly heat up. How did you? Seraphol started. Her mouth hung limply open as she beheld the scene before her. I'd have been flattered by the reaction if I wasn't so focused on not accidentally blowing Ingvild into thousands of meaty chunks. 1. My forehead creased in concentration. I forced my restorative fire throughout Ingvild's body. Sweat began to pour down my face. What I was doing should not have been possible. I was using the Phoenix family's regenerative fire to heal another living being than myself. To date, not one member of the Phoenix family had found a way to transfer it, even temporarily, to another person. Their imaginations just weren't accepting enough. Magic in this world worked because you thought it would. Sure, it took some trial and error to make things run properly, but for certain endeavors, it was worth it. My assumption was no Phoenix ever considered there to be a point to sharing their regeneration. I was different. The mere ability to do something new was enticing enough to figure out tricks that had never been seen before. The fact that I was using one of those tricks to make friends with one of the four Satans was just icing on the cake. Finding what I was searching for with my spreading flames, I latched around the elixir Ingvild had just imbibed. I split it apart with my flame and began to ferry it throughout Ingvild's body. From what I remembered, Ingvild had originally woken up when her sacred gear awoke and shocked her system out of its slumber. I was trying to shock her awake in a different way. I was going to flood her body with fire and wake-up potion and keep swinging around the magical equivalent of a restorative sledgehammer until it either worked or I was too tired to continue. Perhaps this wasn't the best plan, but it was the only one I had. 1. I ferried the potion all around her body, through her legs, her stomach, her heart. Ingvild Leviathan shot upright in her bed, gasping as her eyes flew wide. As soon as she was up, I recalled all of my fire out of her. Ingvild let out a pained cry as the last of my fire left her. She turned towards me with frightened eyes, but Seraphol stepped between us, arms raised in front of her placatingly. Easy. He was helping you. You've been asleep a long time. What's the last thing you remember? Ingvild's fear turned to confusion. Where am I? Don't worry, sweetie. You're safe. Come with me. We'll get you situated. Seraphol helped her to her feet, then looked over her shoulder at me. The Leviathan gave me a very purposeful nod before helping Ingvild out of the secret room, shielding the girl's eyes from the destroyed devil bodies around her. As I watched one of the greatest secrets of the world, one I'd planned to take the utmost advantage of, limp away in Seraphol's arms, I couldn't help but sigh. All I could do now was take care of myself and my people. Ubeluna and Clarissa's fates had been tied to mine. I wouldn't let them down. It had been a little over a week since Seraphol Leviathan and I had awoken Ingvild. I wasn't too sure what all Seraphol discussed with her, but she had verified that Ingvild did indeed possess a Longinus. Apparently, it had awakened when Seraphol reincarnated her, and Seraphol had used a mutation bishop she'd traded away from some minor lord to reincarnate Ingvild. The underworld was reeling from the news. The new Satan Leviathan had a willing servant of the original Leviathan line who, unlike Kateria Leviathan, one of the 3 leaders of the old Satan faction, could use her clan trait. Almost all who doubted the power of the new Satans were instantly disproven. With so much focus now placed directly on Seraphal and her newest peerage member, no one cared about the scorned Phoenix Sun. With Seraphal's help, I was able to disappear from the public eye without so much as a peep from anyone looking to take advantage of me or my peerage. If the rather obvious manner in which Seraphal was parading around with me didn't discourage enemy action against us, the steading she granted us would. When Seraphal and I had made our initial deal, I'd made sure she left Ubaluna with a signed copy of everything, but I still wasn't sure the Satan would honor her agreement. I needn't have worried. Not only did Seraphal deliver all I'd asked for, she'd exceeded my wildest expectations. When I'd requested a home and land, I'd expected to receive a small house with a 10-acre farm around it. Instead, she gave me one of her personal vacation homes and all the amenities and items therein. All I wanted out of this was somewhere in my peerage and I would be safe, but I got a home that rivaled the Phoenix Manor in certain areas. No one would be stupid enough to miss the very obvious faff that Seraphal had given me one of her personal estates. Seraphal had sent a very clear message to anyone with a brain. I was under her protection now. 4. The grounds surrounding the estate for 50,000 acres were now mine. Apparently, Satan's vacationed in style. It wasn't even close to as sizable as the Phoenix estate, or any pillar for that matter, but it was still large enough to restore my nobility. On those lands was a large lake and a river bending off from it, as well as a vast, sparse forest. The manor itself was 4 stories tall, with 2 sublevels, a basement and a vault. Within the home was every piece of furniture I could ever want. A fully equipped and stocked kitchen, 2 separate research labs, a training area, and a full armory of various weapons and armor. The basement contained a war room and magical holding cells, and while Seraphal had cleaned out the vault below stating, "I can't trust you with this stuff," it still made for a fantastic place to lock away anything of value I might acquire through various means. I was sure that while Seraphal had turned over full control of the incredibly potent wards to me, she likely still had a way into the mansion if she ever felt she needed it. Even so, I couldn't have been happier. If the steading was anything to go by, she was rather pleased to know me at the moment. I had no plans to ever piss her off in any way, especially in the near future, so for the moment, we could rest easy. Things had more or less quieted down. We were removed enough from any major cities that the only reason people would bug us was if they were dedicated. The major news agencies were now too focused on Seraphal's newest bishop to care too much about the scorned Phoenix Sun. Things were almost good. Sitting in the my manners, that was still weird, sitting room, I inspected the sword resting in my lap. It was the silver blade I took from the devil guarding Ingvild after I killed her. I'd never seen anything like it. The hilt's grip was patterned with dozens of diamond shapes dotted in a swirling vortex. The pommel was a simple silver stone that sharpened to a dull point. The crossguard sat perfectly perpendicular to the blade, an etched pattern of an eagle running through both prongs up to the main blade. The blade was just over 2.5 feet in length and was patterned with more flowing etching, though this was not as detailed as the eagle. The blade design was a simple array of looping lines interwoven and seeming to flow up the length of the blade. 1. I could feel magic in a blade, but I wasn't an enchanter or craftsman. I didn't know exactly what the blade could do, and Clarissa was busy playing with her new toys in her private lab. I wasn't going to interrupt her for something so simple that I could learn later. "Is something troubling you, my king?" Ubaluna, who was sitting across from me on the sofa, a cup of tea in her hands. "Nothing's wrong," I said, sheathing the blade in a simple leather sheath. I looted off one of the plain swords Seraphal had left behind in the armory. "I'm just wondering what makes this sword special, but I can worry about that later." Resting the sword in my lap, I smiled up at Ubaluna. "We haven't really had a chance to talk since everything went to shit. How are you holding up?" Placing her tea down on the coffee table between us, Ubaluna said, "You do not need to worry about me, my king. I am well." Having mentioned everything go to shit, My mind drifted to a potentially important matter, and I nervously swallowed. Have you been in touch with your parents since this all kicked off? Are they all right? Lady Phoenix didn't go after them to get at us, did she? I'd set Euboluna's parents up using the Phoenix Pillar's money. If the Harpy was feeling vindictive, she would have gone after them. Eubeluna smiled pleasantly, causing me to sigh in relief. I saw them just yesterday while you and Clarissa were inspecting the contents of the lab. They have had no trouble from the Phoenixes, but have decided to move to a further city anyway, as a precaution. Will they have enough to get away cleanly? Yes, my king. The work you provided them with has been more than generous. I still cannot thank you enough for that. I waved her off. I told you, you don't owe me anything. I'm just glad they didn't encounter any trouble. The last thing I want is for them to get pulled into this mess. We lapsed into silence for a brief time before a frown grew on Eubeluna's lips. What's wrong? I asked. Eubeluna shook her head. Nothing, my king. It's just I must apologize. For what? My actions during the raiding game. I acted improperly, and my actions were likely the catalyst for the ills that have befallen you. I failed as your queen. Eubeluna bowed her head as she finished speaking. Shifting the sword off my knees and resting it against the side of my chair, I stood and walked over to Eubeluna, sitting down on the couch next to her. She held her position as I sat down next to her, and I heard her breathing erratically. Well, I couldn't have that. Gently, I reached out and grabbed her chin with my hand, turning her face up towards me while I leaned in. As I kissed her, I felt her tense before slowly accepting it and grabbing my arm with her hand. Pulling back, I smiled and said, "Nothing that happened is your fault. Even if it were, I'd probably be thanking you. What happened caused the Phoenixes to show their true colors, and I'm glad I got away from them as cleanly as I did." Ravel and Ruvel accepted, of course. I was a little surprised by you suddenly kissing me, but I didn't dislike it. I actually really liked it. You've known me longer than anyone except my family, so you know I'm not the most socially capable guy there is, but I want to see where this emotion between the two of us goes. Would you be all right with that? Eubeluna's face lit up, and she eagerly leaned forward, pressing her lips against mine. When she pulled back, her smile was even brighter. I would like nothing more, Riser. Then I guess we'll see where this goes. 3. A loud tolling bell interrupted me as I went in for another kiss. The large grandfather clock in a room was striking 5 o'clock. 2. I should prepare a meal, Eubeluna said, standing from the sofa. Eub, we could just eat sandwiches. You don't need to make anything. I want to. I will see you at dinner. She left the room, a skip in her step I hadn't seen before. I like to think I was the cause of that. I watched her go, then walked back to my chair to retrieve the sword I'd won from the old Satan faction devil. I picked it up and headed towards my private lab, the other lab Clarissa and I had worked on yesterday, and decided its proximity to the master bedroom and I should claim it. I wanted to find out what this sword did. You showed generosity. A cool, silvery voice spoke. 2. I drew the sword and spun around in a circle, looking for whoever had just spoken. Look at your hand, devil. My eyes panned to the sword in my grasp, and my jaw fell open. No, there is no way. Yet that is the case, banished scion of the Phoenix. You're not like the last devil who wielded me. She was consumed by selfish desires and reveled in the slaughter and torture of others. Yet you ask after the well-being of those connected to your servants, who distract them from their duty. You even go so far as to provide them a home and labor. Why?